That might do it. Plug the laptop HDMI into one of the monitors. So it they move the big box. Yeah, unfortunate.
It's work.
And yeah, we're changing that.
Wait, how is it both a signal to the monitor and an output from another device? That's crazy.
Because this monitor itself is just hooked straight into the computer. And then it runs out as genius. It's what for that is on. It's a nothing.
Oh,
It's a change.
cool.
Right? See what's going on. That.
Dude, fancy.
Yeah, if you want to change it, just where it says on top. Click that, gives you a couple options for it.
Oh.
No, okay.
This is
No,
cool.
it's not.
Oh.
But it is a little more reliable than the fancy. I can tell that. I do. Yeah. Oh, no, it's not like the most unreliable. It is hot garbage.
Wow.
And you're all in middle space.
What's that? That's it.
Then you're all in middle space.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Weird. It's going pretty good. Feel pretty good. Yeah. This is the only one I found it here. I just went through like 3 classrooms. This is the only one I could. Nobody has markers.
No.
Yeah, if you know where there are markers, that would be. Yeah, that'd be great. How long is it gonna be?
10 minutes?
Okay, so I should probably start then.
So like 20 minutes. We're good visual lights.
What do I want to do? I want to do this. Uh, okay. I guess I'm gonna give it like 3 minutes or something.
Yeah, it's probably just having markers are so
Yeah.
it's probably like talking on the phone, also using this.
Ah. Oh, that is. Oh, interesting. No, that's this USB-C is actually a display input too. That's the lap. Yep. No, that's totally working. I think what I need to do is now go PC. Yep, and PC. Yep, and PC. Oh, that's not. Oh, wait. No, that is the PC. How did we get that to be the laptop? Let's see. See if I can poke it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. There you go. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that. Is that part working? Okay, cool. Yeah, it sounded like it might be a while. Huh. Well, okay. Got no markers, but that's not a big deal. Um, my plan is basically I was just gonna write down, I think a general schedule. I have like this is probably like a 40-minute talk about kind of the basics of what you should know about market research, like where your game is going to be positioned and what you how you should think about it as you're working on it. I've got another one that you guys have probably seen stuff like it, which is like about the first 5 minutes of your game. That should probably be like an hour and a half or so total at that point. We can probably take a break and then do like designer play tests at that point. Does that sound good? Okay, cool. So this talk is the kind of thing that I'm not 100% an expert in, but I know enough to do what I need to do, which is the kind of thing that I think you guys should know as well. It's super important if you want to keep making games to kind of understand what you can do to make them successful. And even if it's never, dude, your direct responsibility, knowing it is going to help you talk to the rest of your team and kind of evaluate decisions that you could be making. In a lot of ways, I think of this as kind of like playtesting. It's something where you're trying to figure out what people are responding to. You want to know what they're going to be bored by. You want to know what historically they've liked, and you want to know what they're going to be excited by. And kind of like playtesting, you need to interpret it correctly. It's the sort of thing where people will say they want one thing, but they don't know exactly what they want. So you still have a responsibility to show them new and exciting stuff. But at the same time, if you go too far, they're going to get confused. They're not going to know what you're doing. They're not going to be interested in the first place. Or if they do go all the way through and actually play it, if their expectations don't line up with what they're giving you, they usually say it's not very good. It's something you see a lot with like movies as well. A lot of movies that are very good have bad. You know what the cinema score rating is? Yeah. Cinema score is incredibly correlated with how closely the marketing matched up to the movie. So movies that have like twists where a character like turns out to not be important, or it's it pretends to be one movie and then it kind of shifts into a different genre. That's the sort of thing that gets a low cinema score because it's something that is upsetting audience expectations, and people aren't trained to do that. Um, that doesn't mean that it's bad, but it means that it's a decision that you have to make like willingly. Like you know what you're doing, you know what it's going to cost you when you make decisions like that. Anything that you learn from market research is never going to be the word of God forever. People know, people will tell you what they like, and that's all going to be based on stuff that they've already seen before. They can't tell you what they will like in the future, and they can't really tell you that they're going to be bored with stuff in the future. In terms of your responsibilities, so there are different divisions in labor in like making commercial games. There's if you're working at a big studio, there's going to be a marketing department. Usually that marketing department is not attached to the studio. Big publishers will have that centralized, and they will come down, they'll talk to like the creative director to kind of figure out what the pitch for the game is and figure out how to craft their marketing. For indie games, if you are trying to pitch an indie game and you have a publisher, most of the publishers will say things like, "We will do the marketing." Uh, Most of them are also bad at that, and you need to help them, or you need to take control of it. What a publisher can be good for a small developer is stuff like if they have a channel, like a marketing channel that people see stuff and they can get more traction with that, that they can launch trailers more effectively. They can kind of build pre-sales more effectively. In my opinion, there's only a few that actually do that very well. Like, oh shoot, what are they called? The former Gamecock guys. Uh, the big indie publisher that publishes all the stuff. So like Annapurna, Raw Fury, um, and this third one that I'm blanking on. Those are like decent, and most of the other ones are actually terrible. But they will have people who graduated with like marketing degrees who might be able to help you, but you still need to kind of make the case yourself, dude. Okay, so last year we had a game that was like we built a prototype, and we talked to a bunch of publishers at GDC, and like Humble, Annapurna, Take-Two had an indie division. They all shut down over the summer. So what's currently happening with those is that they're kind of reorienting their market space. A lot of the bigger companies that like founded indie labels decided that it just like wasn't worth it at the budget levels that they were doing. It was getting too risky for them. So there are still a bunch that are going at like 100 to $500,000 level, and there will always, but and then there's a bunch of like mid-budget space for Steam, and that kind of like console space that's going to be like $6 to $15 million, and that's like a team of 30 to 50 people working over a few years. And what they were getting out of was kind of that in between like 500K to that like 5 million range, and that's where a lot of Humble stuff lived. That's where a lot of the private division stuff that Take-Two was doing was bigger budget than that, but they also were hitting they hit a wall of they didn't have specific expertise to do that. So they decided that they couldn't use like the resources of Take-Two in a better way than another company could. And they're like, our money is not smarter than other companies' money. So, they shut it down. So, and what that also means is that like right now, when you talk to indie publishers, a lot of what they offer you is marketing. And so you need to do your due diligence to check if they actually can do that, because a lot of them actually can't, and they're actually really bad at it. And what's always going to happen is you are going to care more about your game than they care about your game. Like they might have some expertise, but they're it's generally like you have a producer assigned to you from them, and they're splitting your responsibility across a bunch of games that they're running. It's like a waiter at a restaurant. They have to manage so many things, and they give a slice to each one. And you might get a bad producer. Like some producers are really on the ball, some aren't, but they're not somebody that you control. They're the publisher's like support for you. So uh, you have limited recourse if like they're doing that. And when I say they do the marketing, that usually bundles with a publisher will usually ask for things like, we'll do your store page and we'll be responsible for like managing your app on every storefront that you're on, which means that they control the price and the sales. And they also control paying you. So it is possible, like, you do audits with them, but it is possible for your game to sell and then you're waiting for them to pay you and they run out of money and they don't pay you. Like, because they're moving that money to like new projects or other stuff that they're behind on. So it's something that you always have to be careful of, basically. When you are pitching to publishers, one of the things that is going to matter a lot is knowing like what you're positioning yourself against and what the kind of sales expectations are for games like what you have. So you're making your case to them that because these other games were like this and they did this well, and my game is similar, but it also has these new features, it should sell in this bucket. Therefore, our budget should be roughly this. That's a reasonable estimation to make, and you can trust me. This kind of the pitch you're making. Um, it's also important when you are talking about features in your game. So every game gets to a point where you are hitting, where you're cutting stuff that was supposed to be in the game. So having an identity and like a knowledge of what really matters for comparable games in your genre can be really important for making those decisions. If it's, are we going to cut the PvP mode or the co-op PvE mode? Um, Building a case for that is kind of based on a lot of external factors. Like what are players' expectations going to be coming into your game? Uh, you're also this is also like I was saying about your tolerance for risk. So when you are if you are thinking of elements in your game as these are the parts that are like other games, and these are the parts that are weird, you're building an understanding of how much of what you're making is surprising to people and hard to understand. And anything that's novel and kind of hard to understand is something that you have to teach people. And so you have that responsibility of if it's a mechanic, you probably need to tutorialize it. You probably need to spend more time tutorializing because we have a lot of our tutorials are repeating things that players already know. Here's how you move. And like 90% of your players already know that, but they're going to be you need to cover your ground. You need to kind of adapt them. And when it's something actually new, that's actually a lot harder. If you're running your playtest right, you'll see people fail out of that, and you'll have to do more of the repetition for that. So I want to ask, uh, what do you guys think are the responsibilities that you have for a game that you want to sell uh, in terms of defining this? Like, what are the things that you would do for making decisions about what should be in your game? Okay, how do you know your style of game? Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah. Okay. How about not style of game? I think there might be a more useful word than style that we could use. I would normally go with genre, actually. Because if you're defining it with genre, it's a useful language to communicate with other people. What kind of expectations would you get from this genre?
I think it depends on the genre.
Okay. Uh,
Hero shooter,
what's that?
like a hero shooter should have
Okay.
these all different characters in the world.
Okay, sure. So, uh, what if so if this is like the player characters, can we generalize that a little bit more in terms of the player's relationship to how they play the game? Like, if you unpack this to other games, yeah.
Perspective.
Okay. Okay, controls, yeah.
I feel like okay, expected perspectives were all like
Okay.
stairs
Uh,
on the seventh and the chose to finish it.
Okay. Okay, what would you call like I am expecting to strafe and run and jump? I think the controls would cover the mapping, like that's your human interface for it. I think we can extract the objects like strafing and running and jumping into something that would cover it for all games. Yeah, sure. Mechanics or movement. Um, you could call it player abilities. I think all of those would communicate it well. So carried expectations of player movement. I also heard you were talking about if you're a tank, you can do certain things. So what would that be? Because that's not like your general abilities.
How it's going.
Sure. So those are variations on like where your baseline is at. So what are those? How does the player understand those variations? Like what are they packaged in the player's mind as? Yeah,
To the game like two basic there, I think the first indication would literally be like an explicit choice between classes and like
cool.
heroes to try them out. They would probably want specs, other changing like slight variations in perspective, like the height, maybe if there's any height.
Sure, sure, sure,
It's like the health and abilities.
sure. What if I was talking about Magic the Gathering? I think it's the same concept for that. What would that be? What if I was talking about like Magic the Gathering?
Card
Card type? What about color? Like your color, right? Like what if it's uh what if it's your play archetype? Right. So for a hero shooter, it'd be like tank, support. Yeah. What would it be in Magic? Sure. Sure. We can probably okay. What if it was like for a CCG? What if I said that? What is red compared to other CCGs? Yeah. DPS maybe. Right. What's green? No, I wouldn't say green is support. Yeah. Usually, have you guys read like the Magic design posts, by the way? I mean, I should get a list of them. So since like 1998, the lead designer of Magic, who's been the same ever since then, has written a blog about the design of Magic, and it's kind of also how he thinks about himself, but it's also how he teaches people in the studio. But he, at this point, he has thousands of articles on how Magic is designed, and a lot of his articles and a lot of his best articles are about color theory of Magic, and it's important for him to tell the players because that's kind of the design team is defining their archetypes and then broadcasting it to the players so that they're like, this is what we're trying to communicate to you. They watch how the players play and that communicates back to them. I think they literally call green the creature deck. Like that's kind of the theme of green. Green has the best creatures. What is blue in this sense? And control's a good way to put it, yeah. Um, uh, what about a platformer that has different characters? What about like Mario Brothers 2? Yeah. Can you break down Luigi a little bit more? Yeah, yeah. It's like it is a weird archetype. Because I think like if Mario's jump is like this, then like Toad's jump is like this, right? Or if it achieves the same height, it would be like this. It depends on what your metrics are and whether you can support that. Um, and if Peach's jump would be like this extended fall off, so your fall is lower. Luigi's is it's kind of a mid between the two. I guess it should go down here. I'm not drawing it very well. Um, yeah, I don't know if a lot of games do that sort of thing because it's like I think actually they moved the control scheme into Yoshi eventually because Yoshi has the stagger jump where it does a normal jump and then it turns it on if you do it. Okay, so if we have these things that are kind of defining our genre, these are also going to define what the player is going to come into your game expecting. So if you're building a Mario game and your default controls are mouse and keyboard, that's going to be unexpected for players, and so you have to. It's not to say that you can't do that, but you have to have a reason that you are confident you can convince people of. And a pitch that kind of makes that make sense. If you're like there are those shooter platformers where you use the mouse to aim. That's kind of an old genre on PC. That specifically has challenges in it that asks the player to aim very particularly at like little dots in the map in a way that would be really hard with like a right stick. And they're like, okay, this is worth it for us. But I wouldn't necessarily see that as a console first control scheme in that case. Um, this is the sort of thing that you can build by doing comparing yourself to other games and kind of understanding like how different am I from these other games and what are my expectations. Do you guys remember the control scheme of Shadow of the Colossus? Yeah. Um, I think R1 is grab, but it's not climb. Triangle is jump. So do you remember how to climb? It's it's totally jump and then R1. So you jump and then you press the button to like grab onto stuff. They also did like I I think X is crouch, if I remember right. So it was kind of mapped as a like up and down thing, which if you've never used a controller before, saying that the top face button is jump makes perfect sense. It's just that almost no game actually does it. Almost every game puts the jump and the button where your thumb rests if it's a jump game, and that's the bottom one. So in order to do this, they had to have a good reason. Like what they were getting out of it was a system of game mechanics that let them climb, that let you say, I want to let go, I want to jump. In most games, we don't have a grab button because climbing is part of the jumping. If you jump towards a ledge and you support mantling, you're going to get up it. There's no, we don't expect the player to not want to do that. And in this game, it was important for them to give you that control. And that was also part of the challenge of the game. You've probably heard this a million times. Actually, I know you have because we were talking about this back in November. But what's super important, and what's important to start this kind of process, is that you have a good pitch that makes sense and communicates clearly to people. So something that describes your game in a way that's enticing, it communicates why it's different and why it's awesome. I want to do this. I want to do this. Let's grab like five game pitches and then kind of go through the comparable process with them. Okay, I need a game pitch. A stupid one. I'll tell you if it's too stupid. It can be boring too. Yeah. Okay. 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 Cool. I think we can actually. I that was like three clauses. I think we only need the first one, right? Like you're a dog guarding the house from robbers. Cool. I need another one. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think for focusing the pitch, you can probably just go action game where you control two characters at once. Honestly. Okay. Another one. Yo. Okay. Um, puzzle platformer where you gain colors. What are colors? Okay. Can I get a fantasy in that? Like, what is this something that I can do that I can't do in other games? Mm-hmm. Okay. Is is there like a connected world or something? Okay. Okay. So I could see it like what you want to be careful with when you're coming up with a pitch is that like describing it as the mechanics because you want to describe it as kind of a story that the you can apply in like like with one leap of thought to think, oh, I can see how a game could be like this. So if it was like a puzzle platformer against an opponent, that that means something to me, like against an enemy, because I don't have an expectation in a puzzle platformer that I'm going to be disrupted. And it promises a little bit more. If that could be wrapped in a flavor like that, I think we could probably communicate this and make it stronger at the same time. Can I get another one? Okay. What does uh what does that look like thematically? Sure. Sure, sure. And you're like you're getting a long-term benefit. Can we can we flavor it? Can we be specific with it? What if we said it's an RPG where you can bargain your soul? Like, I think that something when you wrap it like that, it kind of carries, it would carry we have cultural context for like a Faustian bargain. Um, but it also carries like a thematic punch as well. And it's not like a mechanics first pitch. So if you are, a lot of times we think of our game ideas coming from the mechanics first because we're like, oh, it'd be cool if we mix and match them like this. And that can totally work for working through it. When you're communicating with other people, you definitely want to take it out of the realm of like the game mechanics. Oh yeah. Can I get one more? Yo. Okay. Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. I think we can go off of these totally well. So the first thing that we do with an exercise like this for this market research is find games that are similar to what we're actually talking about. And we kind of want them to we want them to tell us about how well they did and how they pitched themselves to our audience. We want to look in our genre because that's going to be the most common place to look. It's probably the most descriptive that you're going to do. Looking within your theme and art style, this is a lot about tone. So when you look at like an RPG, is your tone look like a Souls game where it's like dark fantasy, or is it a comedy tone? Uh, the game Another Crab's Treasure, for instance, is a Souls like with a color like a cartoony art style and it's kind of funny. And so they were specifically skewing off of their genre. And a lot of the way that they positioned themselves to an audience was not in the Souls genre. They kind of positioned a lot of their stuff towards other players. By scope, this is also super important where you're not necessarily comparing yourself to if you're a small game, you're not necessarily comparing yourself to a mega budget game. Um, you're kind of within what a player's expectation will be. You have certain expectations for how long you'll be, how crazy your art budget will be, and you kind of want to look within a similar bound. One of the tools that you can use for this is a relation map where you pick two axes and you kind of map a bunch of your similar games. So in this is like about RPGs that have like monster collection elements. So if you're saying the game that you're making is an RPG where you collect monsters, you can look at like, well, uh, they get more technical and hardcore along this axis, and then you're picking a spot where you want to be in there, for example. So if you say Dragon Quest V, which is a game that had monster collecting, it wasn't a big part of it. It was not as much of a focus on the game. So you're like, it's not as going to be as big of a part of how we're positioning to players. This is less about how your game is and more about how your game is going to appear to other people. And that's going to kind of drive what your message to your players is. So when I talk about Dragon Quest V, they had it as a back of the box feature. It was like, this is what's new and cool about this game. But that wasn't like on the front of the box. They spun off into the Dragon Quest Monsters series when they wanted to make that their message and kind of push that up here. Since Dragon Quest, for instance, I'm actually going to move Dragon Quest V over here. Ni no Kuni actually has really similar mechanics as Dragon Quest V. When they do the Dragon Quest Monsters game, they take away a lot of the narrative and they de-emphasize that. And that's because Pokemon doesn't have very much narrative. And so their assumptions about how players were going to engage with the game were that narrative was much less important. They already had this marker of like where Pokemon sits and kind of what players are expecting from it. So when they were building Dragon Quest Monsters as their spin-off, they're assuming we don't need to put as much in this because we can be more mechanics driven. If we were to take the game sort packages or die, what are similar games to that? I can think of one good one. Right? Maybe two. Okay. I've got two in mind. Yeah. Okay, cool. I think that's a good thought. And this can affect like where we push it as well. Anyone else? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's important. Anything else? I was also thinking of, do you guys know Wilmot's Warehouse? That's got a specific like package, like a warehousing theme. And it's in a small budget area. There's also, I think there's a sub theme of like cartoony corporate satire that exists. If I think of, like, I guess it was called Say No More. Say No More. That might be the biggest example I can think of, like in this kind of space of that theme. Anything else that anybody can think of that you'd want to put near this? Yeah. Okay. What is that called? Yeah, we'll have to figure out the name of that. But actually, the next thing I want to do, if you guys can figure out the name of that, that'd be great. Because I don't remember it at all. As if we put it here, there's a, in terms of like what's appealing about these, there's definitely these are more like pretty mechanically driven games. Um, these ones are more comedy driven games, so they're very like theme dependent. And these are, all three of these are like the players embodied in the world. Yeah. Is that really what it's called? Cool. An attaché case. Sure. So if we say, the fundamental genre is puzzle and character. Um, Tetris clearly goes on the far end, and like Overcooked is probably on this end. Maybe if we're doing like theme and we do like abstract versus comedy, something like that. That's kind of like a broad theming decision. We get something like Overcooked is down here. Wilmot's Warehouse is character based, but it's not funny based. Yeah, it's not. It's actually pretty abstract. Say No More is very similar. It's actually in a really similar spot. It's less comedy because it's not a co-op game. And that's actually super important. Like when I look at it like that and I put, oh, Overcooked is really funny. I might even want to push it down more. A lot of that is because it's multiplayer. And they made that very clear decision of, well, if it's going to be co-op and you're going to be dropping stuff and screwing up your friends, then that makes it really funny. And it literally can't be that funny if you're playing by yourself. I think I would put Attaché. Honestly, Attaché game is kind of funny. I'll put it down here. And Tetris is not funny at all. Sorry, Tetris. So where would we want to put our sort packages or die game on this? Is this actually? It doesn't actually matter, but we kind of want to pick something so that we're like positioning ourselves. Totally. If you die in Tetris. If you die in Tetris, you die in real life because blocks crush you.
Can't think of one just
Yeah.
like I just took a dangle and like we looked out the door, it's like, oh, we're gonna die. Like eventually how I'm gonna send them hold the throws and so it's standing there and looking like
Totally.
so I kind of feel it leaning towards common but dead as far as like overcooks. And
Okay. I think that's reasonable. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay, let's put ourselves like right here. We also have to do so this is a little bit weird because these are pretty different genres than these, but I think that puts us in just assume that we're in kind of a character moving stuff genre, like moving stuff around genre. And this is actually more of a combat game, but we have similar games that have done a certain well. Like I think our best comparisons in this case would be to Wilmot's Warehouse and Overcooked. And if you're telling people, if you were pitching this, say, and you can bring up something like the Antash case game, which was kind of a breakout hit. And a lot of the breakout was because it was one of those, oh, I always wanted that things, and it was kind of funny too. Um, that's reasonable to bring up and say, we want to try and hit like an audience that was appealing to. One thing to note is that there's kind of a difference between doing this for yourself and doing it for a publisher. For a publisher, you're always going to pick games that have like been successful, right? You're going to say, well, I mean, our comparison points are these big hits. Like you don't want to be too crazy, but you want them to look at this and think, oh, well, if these did well, because the implication of this chart is that the positioning is actually kind of what drives the success. What you're doing when you're building it for yourself is just finding your neighbors to help you compare yourself to them. So what we're going to use these comparison games. In this case, let's just look at Overcooked and Wilmot's Warehouse. Maybe the Attaché case game. We want to look at what in our game is better than the ones that we're comparing to. You know, so that we can say these are like features that we have that they don't have. Or we want to know what's worse. And so we can either decide if these are things that are player expectations, like if it is a player expectation that the graphics be amazing, and we know that we don't have any artists, we might be in trouble. But if you're competing in the Tetris space and you're like, you know what, we're totally fine, even though we look a little bit worse than Tetris, you might be okay, and then you can like choose to minimize that. What's new is super important because that's going to be the whole reason why somebody cares instead of a game that they've already played a million times. You do need this, even though people don't understand you when you're telling them what's new. And then just in terms of advantages and disadvantages, this is more about your team composition. Like, are you a uh, are you a bigger team and you have a bigger budget and therefore you're going to be able to utilize that in a certain way? Or are you a bigger team and that's going to be a problem because your game is going to be a lot more expensive to make, but you don't think you can grow the size of like that genre? What you are looking for to figure out from these other games is how much they've sold, because that's really going to define your reasonable budget expectations. And you should be scared if it feels like you're way outside that. You want to know how their marketing performed so you can measure whether what you're going to do is going to work against that. Like if you are doing a similar pitch and you have your trailer or your social posts and they do 20% as well as the games that you're comparing yourself to, you probably need to change something. Looking at their community especially for smaller teams, community is super important because you can rely a lot more on hardcore audience to support you than getting the word out to a super broad audience. That's always going to be really difficult the smaller you are because that broadening who you're talking to takes money usually. Cultivating people who are hardcore, that's based a lot more on your content. You still need to reach them in the first place and you need to appeal to them so they get to that step. But when you're small, you kind of want to hit that. And of course, what is their message? Because what are they pitching what's cool about their game on? Because you want to hit a similar thing. Tools to do this. This is like the down and dirty stuff that I'll use when I'm trying to figure out if something makes sense. SteamDB and Gamalytic are actually extremely similar. They both give you estimates of how a game sold on Steam based on how many user reviews there are. In general, and this is wrong, you can usually expect 10% of reviews to be sales, to be 10% of sales to turn into reviews. So if you go, this game has 1,000 reviews, it probably sold something like 10,000 copies. That's going to change based on how big the game is and how hardcore their fan base is. And what Gamalytic is actually a little bit better because it's SteamDB is a little bit outdated right now, but that's going to help you. It'll give you a band of sales. So like this is, this is a 3x difference between their minimum estimate and their high estimate. I think this is for split fiction that I was pulling. So based on what's publicly available, they're like, well, it's between 500,000 and 1.5 million. The revenue is almost certainly, this gets harder the longer a game has been around because games start to get sold at lower prices. They get included in like super flash sales. This you can figure out if you really need to dig into it because you can kind of, and I think they're already doing this, but like if I'm mapping the number of sales that a game gets over time, you've got a huge area right here that's maybe at full price, and then you've got this at a certain price. You'll see spikes where it was sold at like $5. So I think they're taking that into account when they do this, and you probably don't need to go into that like level of detail. The final thing, this is actually super important for the number of review scores, or for the number of the way that the number of reviews correlate to the sales. Games that have like lower, like a 50% or 60%, they have a lower number of people converting into actual sales. You can look for press releases, which can help. A lot of times, the only time you're actually going to get hard numbers on how much a game sold is if a company's like, hey, we're proud to announce that we've sold 100,000 copies or something. And so you just kind of peg that to a certain time, and you go, well, if this was, it's kind of similar to when I was drawing the sales over time. If at this point they say we've sold 100K, that gives you kind of an estimate, like a basic, like, oh, this is probably another 50K right there. So I'm assuming they're at that. Finally, there are wish list numbers. I'm going to go into that in a second, but wish lists tell you before a game comes out, it's actually a pretty decent estimate of how many copies a game is going to sell when it launches. Because your ability to spread your game after it's out, if you're like, well, if you're thinking, well, our game is so good, nobody knows about it, but after it's out, people will talk about it. It's very hard to break out of that and become viral if you weren't already viral. If your pitch when it was just a trailer wasn't super popular, it's extremely unlikely that your game, even if it's awesome, will be super popular just because it's good. I mean, it can happen, but it's very unlikely. In general, you can take a look at the numbers of wish lists that people are doing and get between 15 and 30% of those will buy it right away when the game comes out. If we were to do this, oh wait, do I have internet? If we were to do this for our sort packages or die game, then I would go to Overcooked. Let's go with the first one, even though it's a little bit older. If it's older, then things will be more different than they are now. So keep that in mind. But also, if it's a sequel, a lot of times they will have done a better job of selling to a community, and they can kind of expand beyond that. So Overcooked on Steam only. Does this have reviews in it? Yes, it has 15,000 reviews. And so from that 15,000 reviews, they're estimating between 540,000 and 1.2 million. So that is way more than 10%. The reason for that is because Overcooked has a lot of Steam keys coming from bundles and stuff like that. So this is the sort of thing that's tricky that a site like this can do better than you can. If I were to go to SteamDB Overcooked, they've got the 15,000 reviews. Tells you what engine it came out of. They have the pricing for every region. They show you their sales history. This is actually super useful just to get a general sense of what strategies are for putting your game on sale. One of the things that you can see in this pattern is that people started adopting a high base price and deep discounts. Because what we used to see before that was the price would kind of gradually go down. But what people found is that leaving your price high and doing a big discount periodically gets you a bigger percentage off on a Steam sale. It gets you more notice for people who are waiting for it to hit a certain price.
There's also some versions you can the other notifications that you percent discount.
Do they do it by discount percentage? I know that, and the wishlist stuff is different for every platform. Um,
So this telling you goes on sale. It tells you by how much.
right, but while you can put your game on sale whenever you want, there are things that you have to do to get included in the list of like the Steam fall sale or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it is. Uh,
Fall the game here versus on sale. What's Baller's game? Oh, it's like 10%. Okay, I'm not gonna buy that.
Sure. But like, is there because when you put your game on sale and Steam sends an email, Steam is doing that marketing to people who have wishlisted for you. So I think Steam has rules about how often they will email people when your game goes on sale. I don't know what those are off the top of my head, but they're totally available for what you can get Steam to do, because that's send an email out to everybody, and that's Steam has their email address. You don't have their email address.
What about a game like Balata? Balata is really pretty easy. It's not
I want to write this as I want to write Overcooked down as like 4 million. Do you want to know what Balatro is? So one of the things for certain games, like Overcooked is a character game. I think do they have like phone and tablet versions of Overcooked?
I think so. But what if it's small?
China is this is China is huge. I will share with you guys a presentation about like where the market is going. Basically, all the growth in Steam in the past 5 years has been in China. Yes. Yes, but not a ton of Western games do well in China. So in terms of what will it take to make it successful in China, that's a hard question to answer because not many people have cracked it. And there are some obvious things you can do, like put cultural effects in, like do different holidays. When you're thinking about locations like to visit, you can think of locations in mainland China or something like that. Um, but you
Also keeps things for producers.
this is weird. So there's both an official Chinese Steam where you've like logged in and the only games on there are the ones that have the license to sell in China, and they don't license very many games, so it's actually pretty small. And then there's like a gray market Chinese Steam market where you can get any game, and that's much bigger. Like that's where most people are getting it. So part of it doesn't appear to be that important for Steam specifically. For estimating sales on a game, I put 4 million here, which what I really should have done is PC, because this is of course multi-platform. In a lot of games, we for like big games, we normally expect something like between 30 and 40% of your sales are going to be on PC, and then the rest will be on console. Uh, and the bulk of the console right now is going to be PlayStation. Xbox game sales have really gone off since they've successfully messaged that you don't need to buy games on Xbox, you just need Game Pass. For something like Overcooked, this is what we would need to do is try to find estimates of like how many reviews it has on Switch and kind of convert that. Probably I'd use a similar ratio as this and do like how many sales does it have on PlayStation. So I would say I would want to actually look this before I'm even using a ballpark number, but probably the gross revenue of Overcooked is closer to $10 million. Um, I'll look up Electro. I want to look up Wilmot's Warehouse as well. So between 3 and 6 million copies on Steam alone, 36 to $80 million. So that's that's almost 10 times larger than our estimates of Overcooked. Even though it just tells you how much bigger a game can be. And like the sale price is still pretty low on this. Although I think Overcooked likes to sit at 19 Canadian. I think it's 15 US is what they sit at. So they sit at a similar price. Of course, if this was something like Balatro was $25 and it sold 80% as many copies, it would have much higher revenue for that. It's a matter of this is an important part of your comparables where you're looking at like if I can find a similar game, Balatro doesn't have very many good comparisons, but like Overcooked, you can find comparisons to Overcooked that have higher prices and see kind of get a sense of how much that cost them. I just want to Wilmot. I think there's only one game called Wilmot in the store. Okay, so between 20 and 40,000 copies, between 230 and 486,000. So Wilmot's Warehouse did have console ports. I think it did pretty well on Switch. We'd want to kind of correlate that. But its revenue was probably close to 500K. I think it's a reasonable place to put it for now. I should do Say No More, but I don't think it's very high. Come on. Are you serious? 38,000 copies. That's a decent estimate. Very similar. This is extremely similar to the Wilmot's Warehouse estimate. And then the attaché. Wait, is it this? No. No, there was a game that was that. What was it called? There was a game that was this is the game that is the Resident Evil attaché case game. Ah. Well, if you remember it, let me know. Okay, so if we have done an exercise like that, let me actually do. Okay, go there. Go there. What is it called? Save room. Like, okay. What does it say on Gamalytic about it? Yeah, did you see this one? We want to know how much they sold to kind of understand what our budget, what a reasonable budget would be, how their marketing did so that we understand whether our marketing is working or not, how much they relied on their community and how big we should kind of expect it, and what they were messaging to players. Cool. Um, There's also, if you're doing, it depends on your monetization scheme as well. If you're doing free to play, this is all going to look super different. And you really should only look at free to play games because they're going to have so many more people installing it and like wishlisting it than other stuff. What you want to do with your estimates of like what you think are reasonable sales is to kind of use that to set your budget. And you also have to remember that whatever your gross sales are, you have to take 30% off for the store because they're going to take that. Retail sales you only get like half of because retail is different. There's taxes, which is going to be at least 20%. So for if you were looking at games that had um, an estimate of 2.5 million gross, I would want to budget 750,000. If we're looking at a $500,000 gross, I would probably set this between a $100,000 and $200,000 budget for something like this. If that's actually what we're estimating we're going to sell. And so if you are saying, well, I can't make this game for less than $1 million, you know, and that's like $1 million is like 6 people over a year and a half to 2 years or something like that. If that doesn't work, you are taking on a big risk and you have to have a good answer for why you think that'll work. And it's also going to be really risky sounding to a publisher if you're trying to pitch it to them. Another thing you're going to want to look at in terms of looking at the marketing, just kind of get a sense for what their trailer views look like. So you kind of know what a good trailer and a bad trailer is. I think my general feel is that a trailer has just about no, you want to do it, but it's not going to have very much impact if you're seeing like less than 30,000 views on it. What you generally do is put a trailer on your storefronts and then also put it on YouTube and also put it on like social media. And you kind of want to compare it to other things. When this is like from the Nintendo Direct that just came out. So these are some of the games from this. And you can see really big differences. This is not going to be like their total views over time. This is like, well, this is 13 hours after it went live. So this probably represents 60% of what their lifetime views are going to be, something like that. What do you see? Do you want to, can you guys read these numbers, by the way? Cool. Yeah. Does that tell you anything? Yeah.
Also means that this is how do I put it? Giving you an extremely green game of opposites.
Totally.
So
Totally. 100%. And we can check that by looking at this is the Nintendo of America channel. So this isn't these are going to get reposted on uh uh through like IGN and stuff like that. So it's not going to capture all their views, but this tells us like relative stuff. But that's super important. This is Nintendo of America. So that's going to be really, really different for Japan. And it would be useful if we're trying to build like an estimate of what can we expect our regional sales to be, to look at something like that. And if you compare like, oh, Dragon Quest is actually 10 times as big in Japan, that changes my expectations of where this game will do well if we are positioning ourselves similar to that. Anything else? What do you see on this? What's that? Oh yeah? Do you think Nintendo, these are all fake views? Because it's Nintendo's game? Yeah. This one is a new IP. Fantasy Life is a sequel, but it's kind of a small game in the US. This is a compilation of Monument Valley games. This is a remake and this is a sequel. So this is like a small indie team. This is a small team at a big company. This is semi-indie, like I guess you can call them indie now. Small team at a big company, big team at a big company. Yeah, and their expectations. Like it would be a problem if this was not 10 times bigger because this game costs 10 times more than most of these other games.
right.
No, just like you can put the Metroid tag. Looks like a square.
Sure. No, that's super important for our comparisons to look at how this image is a lot of their fantasy. What is the fantasy in the Wandering Village?
Pacific Ocean Seven.
If you can't see it very well, this is like a monster with like jungly ropes hanging down from it. There's fog. Yeah, let me see if I can pull it up. But there's well maybe not. There's fog. This is like a balloon, so there's a sense of scale. This thing is enormous. And we also have the cameras half underwater. We can see more of the world under there.
So even the visual isn't super hard, like can't see.
Well, okay. So if I say this is a monster that's enormous, and here's a little balloon, here's more stuff. What are the difference? These two have a very different focus. What is the image focused on in these games? Yeah, these are character games. And so this is like we're looking at your character is a cool robot person, your character is a cool fantasy knight, and this is a world focused game. Um, anything else that you can pull from this? What's different about this one than the other ones? Hmm. Yeah,
Super far forward such that they can
sure,
actually feature gameplay and feature as well.
totally. There is gameplay on this, so I think that might be part of their pitch, but it also carries their art style. That's totally true. What else about it? There's stuff we can tell from this, like from the view count too. Like, why do you think this is lower than all the rest? Do you have a guess about why that is? Yeah, I think that's a good thing to say. I mean, if you're getting lower views, then you're not finding your audience compared to these other ones. Um, what do we know about Monument Valley? Yep, I think that's huge. Like, this was an iOS game first, so there's not really a reason that you can't play it on a Switch, but maybe it doesn't translate as well as they had hoped. There's something else too. Like, what are they selling me in this?
So
Yeah, yeah. So it's not new. Like, it's hard to disentangle that from the like, well, because it's a port, how much is that lowering it? And because it's a re-release of games that already exist, how much is that lowering it? Sometimes we can look at some other stuff to help with that, but it's something to note. And for them themselves, when they were developing this, and when they're developing a port, they had to set a budget for, is it going to be worth it if we spend $50,000 porting it to Switch, or $100,000? And what are our expectations from that? So I don't know if they knew how they would do on Switch, but it's reasonably small. It definitely helped that they got featured in a Nintendo Direct, though. I'm sure they're happy about that.
so sometimes the trailers lost 3 times the last.
Yes. That is super important. Why do you think it's longer?
Products.
I like put the trailer together,
Problems with like story and gameplay.
like in terms of the ground they need to cover. You're definitely able to do that at a more luxurious pace when you're 3 minutes, certainly. Oh yeah, go for it. Sorry.
So you get a full time.
I think that's a big thing. This is not made by Nintendo. These aren't made by Nintendo, so Nintendo gives them as much time as they do. Um, but that also is like a signal of how much how much uh, weight they carry, like in the presentation, and kind of what their expectations should be. So if you only have a minute, you need to craft your message for that very differently than this. So this Metroid trailer, I think, is like 20 seconds of kind of world setting before you see Samus. And this gets into gameplay much quicker.
Also very much to release.
Hmm. Right. And like the messaging for a re-release, you probably don't need to spend much time introducing the game.
Most players are gonna have some forward or
Yeah. I don't know. I'm thinking about how would you disentangle, if you're selling a remake, how would you disentangle how much you're trying to attract new players from old players? I don't really have a good answer for that myself. But I think your message is probably still heavily based on this game is a classic. So a new player who would see this would be like, oh, well, this game is really important. I should probably play it. Or if you've already played it. The prequels?
also
Um, the Rocket Slime games? Oh, the Joker. Yeah, these are, yeah. Is this 86? Yeah, yeah, the Monsters games were spin-offs. We were talking about when you're looking at like your other games, uh, like the Dragon Quest games have a lot more story than Pokemon games, but when they did their monster collecting spin-off, they cut out the story because they wanted to be more like Pokemon. Yeah, so there's a lot that you can gain from kind of looking at how trailers do compared to each other, what they're pitching on, where like how much time can you spend building your world versus how fast you have to get into like gameplay and make the pitch. You'll see a lot of one thing I see in a lot of what I consider poor trailers and like poorly performing trailers is if they spend a lot of time on the story when it's a small trailer that people don't care about. That can be a really hard pitch to make to new players in terms of what is the game because this goes back totally uh towards your core pitch. Like if your core pitch is sort packages or die, that needs to be front and center in your trailer rather than we are in a world where the corporation is really strong and it's because of this that you will die if you don't sort packages unless you have like a really good joke that bam, this is the punchline. But you know that you have maybe 5 seconds of grace if nobody's heard of your game and you're clicking on the trailer before they go, I don't care, I'm gonna leave. Another thing you can do is look at Twitch Tracker. Twitch Tracker will tell you how many people are watching streams of a game. This is not going to be important for all games because games perform differently on Twitch, kind of based on what they are. Uh, Competitive games tend to have they rely more on this type of viewership. They need to be alive and they will show up on Twitch if they are. Story games tend to pop for a week and then kind of disappear. There's kind of a type of game like Balatro that streamers are playing in between other games, and that can be good to know. So as far as Twitch goes, it's very hard to, I think, make decisions about like where you stand in that. Or what I should say is it's hard to make decisions about what you should change about your game. If you're like, I think similar games to this do poorly on Twitch, it can be very, very hard to say, well, maybe I'll change that. But if you see that similar games to this, like Overcooked, probably does okay on Twitch because it's funny and it's a type of activity that streamers can do that can tell you about something you might need to emphasize. You might need to emphasize something that can let that be a fun experience to watch in the same way. Finally, we can talk about Kickstarter. And Kickstarter can be thought of as a marketing thing for video games. For video games, it's not very good these days. It hasn't been good for quite a few years because enough video game projects failed to ship that people are burned. It's still quite good for board games, and there's actually more sites that do board games, and it's quite good for board games that are going to be this big and have like 300 figures in them. But with video games, everybody was asking for too small of an amount to actually finish their game, and then not finishing their game. So I don't think you can get a lot of useful comparative data by looking at Kickstarter.
Already established career before they start Kickstarter. Like, was that game that's been developed for like a decade plus? Star Citizen.
Mm.
Like they had.
Yeah. So Star Citizen. So when was that Kickstarter?
God, probably a decade ago.
Right. So it happened back when video game Kickstarters were working. So like that was like a 3 or 4 year period. It raised like 4 or 5 million or something like that.
It's way past
No, from Kickstarter.
21.
Yeah. So what I mean is, if it raised 4 or 5 million, that's actually not a big chunk of its total budget. It was like their announced strategy, and it kind of gave it momentum, but it didn't. It wasn't important for them to fund their game, and it was also an experience that would have kind of soured people. It was like contributing to that. So like for all those reasons, it's not very good to compare to stuff nowadays.
So well, the Kickstarter to
So I mean, you can investigate this in the same way as all of this. You just look for comparable games on Kickstarter. Like if you're making a video game, look up video game Kickstarters in the last 3 years, and pick the ones that are closest to you and kind of see how well they did, and come up with like answers for why.
There is 140 in 2022.
In terms of like how much they've raised so far that's not on Kickstarter though, right?
They've total since the game has been announced
Uh-huh.
have crowdfunded $644 million.
Yeah.
Last year, 2 years ago.
I mean, Star Citizen is interesting because like the outside perception is that it's like a game that's not finished, but then there are people who are playing is not even the right word. Like there are people who are engaged in Star Citizen, and they're paying money because it is a social activity. So what they did really well was set up their forums and their community places where people wouldn't feel like they put money in and then walked away. People put money into Star Citizen. The Star Citizen team is continually talking to the players about here's what we're working on now. Here's this crazy thing. And they really care about showing features that are super high end that nobody's ever shipped before. So when they go like, here's a crazy weather system for on our planet. Um, and at this point, I think our community knows that it's going to be years before that ever actually works. But they're giving them new stuff that will happen in the game, just like any live service game. So I think it's probably best to think of Star Citizen as a live service game, like Overwatch, or anything that is continuously shipping content. It's just always super buggy. Like it's a live service game that's really frustrating to play. So the final thing I think you'd want to do is look at their community. So look up their numbers on Discord and Reddit and like YouTube channel. What this should what you're going to want to look for is like how often they're engaging with their community and how big their community is compared to uh, similar games. Like if we're looking at Overcooked and Wilmot's Warehouse, Wilmot's Warehouse, I'm going to guess, has a tiny community, although it's part of Finji, which is like a Finji's a publisher made by the guy who did Cannibal. But I think their community stuff is overall pretty soft. And Overcooked has done a pretty good job of engaging with their community, and what I would expect to find is that their Discord group is much bigger. But you also want to look at the way that they talk to them. Like, how often are they showing them new content versus doing things like scheduling community meetups? For if your game is online, it can be really important to say, hey, everybody get online on Saturday because we can play, and then they'll be able to find games. And that can kind of fall on you as part of your responsibility. As far as Patreon goes, should you look at that for games? I don't think it's useful for only certain types of video games. Like Patreon can convert artists into have the fans of an artist into people who are paying and supporting for that. For video games, usually people are expecting more of a packaged release that they can buy from a store. For certain types of games, for mod or like groups, like if you're working on a game that you can't sell because it's somebody else's IP, that can totally work. And you'll see big Discord communities, and usually they build the Discord and then kind of convert that over to the Patreon. It can work for there's some game collectives that like ship small games every month that can do that. I think that's much harder to pull off. But what they're doing is these are games that they couldn't really they're not finished enough to be able to sell even for it's really difficult to sell them for like $5 because they're still like really small games. They're kind of experimental. So their pitch is usually about, you are supporting us making cool stuff. That also means that you have an obligation to maintain that community and keep them invested in you. A lot of the game devs who are doing those small games will put all their stuff on like itch and then build that as their free outlet and then draw people back, because it's very difficult to make money selling games on itch. It's very nice for distributing games and saying, hey, here's where you can download my game. But if you're asking them to pay you money, you're going to get way less conversions on that than on Steam or something like that, because there's just not a user expectation of paying money on that platform. Finally, as far as social media goes, these days the ones, TikTok and Instagram, are way, way, way more useful than anything else. This is a very similar, comparable thing where you're going to want to look at how they do posts and what actually gets engagement. If you are actually building stuff like this, especially before you launch when you're trying to drive wish lists, you're going to want to come up with a list of like 10 ideas for posts, build a bunch of them and schedule them. It really is like a task, like anything else. And then when you post them, watch their performance so you can say, this message is working, this message is not working. And you can kind of start refining in that. If you start from a place of, this is what our comparables seem to be messaging and it seems to be working on them, and you take that starting point and then you're like, well, we could go here, 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 or here with it. From there, you can start to hone in on like, okay, maybe it's actually this direction that we want to go in. And that's going to guide our messaging. Your goal in this case would be to be doing it early enough that it's driving awareness before your game is on sale, so that when it hits, you're actually popping. You've got enough wish lists that it's going to pop on like your first launch day, and that, because of the way that Steam and all of the console stores work, once you start doing well, it will prioritize you and you'll keep doing well. So you want to be ready to hit that very well. As far as a website goes, websites have only particular uses nowadays. They're not usually, it's generally not worth it for like hosting your forum. Usually people are going to be more ready to jump onto a Discord. Usually I wouldn't consider it a place to drive players to. What it can be useful for is looking professional. So if you're pitching to publishers, you probably want a website that looks like you're a real company that pays real taxes. Or if you want to recruit people, looking like you're a real company that pays people who work for you can be useful. Yeah. So just in general, when you're doing this, you want to figure out like what your general target budget should be. You want to figure out how to talk to your community and what they're going to expect to hear and what you can change from that. And you want to have some measurements ready based on the other games that are like you, so that you can decide, oh, this isn't working, I need to change things. Finally, I wanted to point to GameDiscover.co, which is it's Simon Barkless who runs it. He is a former games media person who kind of works as a consultant about like what sells. Like all consultants, he runs a newsletter. Like all newsletters, he's got a paid tier and a free tier. But his stuff is, if you just read him like once or twice a month, he's really good about talking about, why do I think this game actually worked and why did this game not work, in terms of messaging to their audience. Yeah, so that's it for the comparable research. Does anybody have anything they want to talk about or any questions? If not, we can take a 10-minute break, come back at 4:50.
Patreon seems like a very nice thing for smaller developers that want to do long-term support for you. Like when you're deciding on long-term support for you,
Here, so okay, so you said Patreon seems like a nice thing to do. Let's look at that. Let's see if we can look at that.
first example, so I'm from starting Bob. I think that guy has a picture.
So first off, can you check games on Patreon? I don't actually know how their browsing works. Like I know how to look at it from a certain thing. Here's the game devs category. Oh, this is to sell me on making it. So Patreon themselves wants to pitch you on this. And here are their best case scenarios. So these are the people that have done the best job of this. Very cool. Come on. Look at there you go. Sebastian Grave, 1,200 subscribers. Wait, I thought it usually gives us in bands, not in exact dollar amounts. I wonder if that's because they did this. So first off, he's making game development tutorial videos, so he's not actually making games. Second off, this is tough to live on. This is probably also the gross and not what he gets. He probably gets 65% of that.
It's also just a picture. It's usually with that.
What's that?
And it's also that's just off his Patreon. That's a TikTok probably.
Yeah. Well, how do you get paid from YouTube and TikTok?
Ads, sponsors.
You can do sponsors. I mean, do you think this guy's doing sponsors? So he's got a YouTube channel, which is probably how he built his audience, right? So he's got 37,000 subscribers. So he's like a moderate sized channel. He's got Unity asset store packages. So these are packages that he has made for people to download. And then he has a series, Create Elden Ring in Unity. And this is probably very specifically, I mean, I'm sure he's interested in it, but this is also the sort of thing that he's on YouTube, so he's doing the what is something that gets views. Great. There's also like, look at the first one is 111, 74, 41, 38, 23, 23. So I think he's got something like 23,000 people who watch the whole thing. And so when you're talking about how many of them convert to actually paying him, it's going to be a subset of the people that watched all the way through. Farm RPG. 8,000 members, but it's not breaking it down into paid. They have a free tier, so it becomes really hard to tell on Patreon. It's a lot easier to understand this if they don't have a free tier, actually. It's certainly going to be less than 10% of them are paying. 7,600 paid members. By the way, these are, I think you tell how many show up. So this guy has way more. He's making almost 40,000 a month. He does not have a free tier, which I think is an important part when you're like driving, when you want to drive conversions. This is the main way to pay for Paralives, isn't it? You guys know about Paralives?
Yeah.
So this is the trailer. They have a specific art style. It's a life sim. They've told me that. So I'm getting, actually here, I have a question for you. What am I being sold right here?
Fresh start.
As a game experience. A fresh start. It's a new game. Have you played anything like this? Because I think you've played something like this. I think so. Okay, so if I'm being sold Sims, then I need to know what expectations I have from Sims that are being met and what is new that I can't get from Sims. This looks pretty Sims-like, I gotta say. There's one thing that I can tell that's very different in Sims.
The box.
The what?
character creation gives off very different. It's very different than I've seen in Sims from all kinds of things. Animatics with any of those vehicles. It's survive sorts of things.
Yeah, I think this is super. This is really different. Um, this
I think creativity, charisma makes sense.
yeah, there's Sims have stats like this. I think this doesn't seem weird to me from Sims. This seems weird, although I think we can kind of unpack this in terms of what the mechanics actually are. What do you think vibe is?
How you present yourself, like how your character gonna have boss.
It could be. It could totally be that. Any other guesses about what vibe could be?
Like alignment. Oops.
Totally be that. Like, well, what does alignment mean in Sims?
I guess it means the like what's available for your sim to do based on their model setting for this. So if he wants to do crimes, then what is that?
Yeah, it could totally be that. Like what your character is in does on their own versus not. I could totally see that.
This the lifestyle section is a little weirder. If giving a vegetarian option, it's just
Yeah.
explain it. Just get hands off. And I'm great. It's very this is like
Yeah.
there's a lot. Yes, it's
Well, I think they do. There's like a category of things that are hard, like you wouldn't package them with other things, but are kind of important for identity, like sexual orientation that they don't really fit with other stuff, but you kind of need to put them somewhere. I think that makes sense. Sleeping habits and clean habits does seem a little bit, they seem a little bit weird grouped with stuff like that, but you got to put stuff somewhere. What about the character?
Seems very basic. But actually, bodies the target audience.
Okay. So does it, are you saying that it looks like characters that you wouldn't find in The Sims?
It's very unexpected.
So the thing we need to do,
Stick like customization also sells that for me.
I think, because to me that looks like the old businesses and hobbies. What do you think the best?
I think just the original like seems
So I think what I would want to find, if I want to figure out what Sims says to people and kind of compare it, is I would want something that's relatively recent, but also is the most like general message, general audience message. So if I look at its normal store page, that should have what they consider their best audience trailer. Okay, so what are they selling? Oh. How does this compare to the opening of Paralyze? Yeah,
specific in terms of the
yeah,
layer. There's some
yeah, yeah. I think so.
there's our resident Sims.
I'm positive they're going to show the character creator in this trailer as well. Okay, I think we're moving into a different beat, but everything up to this point, I think, had a very consistent message. What was that message?
Have fun, do whatever.
Have fun, do whatever. Do you think? Anything else?
Um,
Okay. Okay, so like stuff that couldn't happen in real life. Okay. Anything else?
like
Yeah. Very very wacky. I think so. I think it's also like there's something that they can do that Paralives can't do, which is like people probably know what The Sims is, so they can kind of bank on that and not talk about it right away. and they might be appealing more to people who already know a bunch of sim stuff. Yeah.
Showing like really specific stuff and like mechanical data versus the other one, which was way more commercial.
Um, do you, okay. So here's a question. What mechanic is this showing?
So showing took the effort to allow Sims to be able to jump on houses. See the skill of garbage, huh?
Okay. But there's no UI. Like, I don't understand as a player how I can make this happen.
It could be
It could be. It could totally be a cutscene. Like, I don't actually know this. I think there might be an expectation that because if they feel like you have enough trust in the way that the Sims work, that you know that this can happen, but they're very much not showing you how the game plays. Whereas in Paralives, I think we spent so we're HUDless here. Okay, so again, what is this communicating? Yeah.
I mean, maybe compared to the Sims, they're sort of apples, organs, and
Okay.
clean content, but it's immediately setting in the like Sid.
Okay. Sure. So like this is the this is an aesthetic experience that you can have in this game. Maybe this tells you about the type of life your characters could live in this game. Yeah,
It's more like a little like
sure.
just my regular abundance.
Totally. I do think there's something very important in the fact that they're doing the character cell shaded like this. Do you want to take a stab at why? And I think it's pretty smart. I think they made the right choice in doing that. Yeah.
It's like being able to exhibit different facial expressions for characters.
In a way, I think it probably makes it easier to make animations that read correctly on the character in terms of that. Because it's the Sims characters are pretty stylized though. Good at nothing. Well, that's that's your talent. Mm. Honestly, I think if you're doing cell shaded stuff, you are doing all diffuse materials. You're not worried about like running physically based rendered materials or materials that you have to craft the specular layer, the bump layer. I think they specifically chose an art style that would be cheaper, that would still fit with the aesthetic that they're trying to sell. So that's the sort of thing that like they needed to find the cross between what can I make for a quarter of the cost that still looks like 70% as good, and how can I actually make that feel like a benefit to my game rather than a downside. Um, oh, it's that's okay. I think this is a different message than what The Sims was giving.
It's a shadow.
Yeah. Okay, so we're a minute and a half into the trailer. This is actually a 7.5 minute long trailer. So this is actually communicating just by the length and the time that we were spending. This is communicating something extremely different than I think the Sims trailer in total is a minute and 42 seconds, and they have a different expectation of how much people know. Uh, I think I think that relates to their pitch. I think the pitch for this is specifically about the way that it looks and the fantasy that sells being somewhat different than The Sims. And these specific mechanical differences. And I think what that tells us is that this game is specifically for people who have already played The Sims and are looking for something different.
Sims gonna get over what they're doing because they've been around so long. We've moved them around that. Do that.
But they have to, I mean, that's a risk too. Like if this is appealing because it's intentionally very grounded, like pay bills was one of their first points. They consider that one of their strongest selling points in this trailer. I think that sells a narrative of this is a grounded game about like a kind of very aesthetically appealing world, but that still feels related to my world. Where The Sims pitch right now is do things that you can't do in real life, like jump on garbage. Well, yeah, but people would shun you. Uh, and I think that relates to like I think The Sims feels like they have covered enough of their like normal aesthetic ground that it's not a place to sell to people anymore. But that's a choice they're making. That is, I think, they're losing some things because of that. Okay, I can go really quickly over the next thing. Okay, cool, cool, cool. I'm gonna try and go through this one pretty fast. Oh, shut up. Oh, nice. Okay, grab drinks if you want them, and I'll start this in like 30 seconds. Oh, what?
Actual food.
Chicken? Oh, I'm good right now, but thank you.
What's the plan? You're good, yeah? You want to go? You got that good fun?
Good.
Good.
Came through. We also learned that sort packages or die should have a budget of about $200,000.
Okay.
So that's pretty reasonable. Distribute, maybe spread it. Give it a nice spread.
I just like, yeah. I got one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a terrible idea. Yum, yum.
Maybe got
It's like Vietnamese chicken,
Korean.
Korean chicken. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Grab like Korean sauce. Yes. Yeah. Like I'm making sport. Thank you. I really, yeah, I was all, but I was like the target. I was definitely with him. We're doing it all top down. We're at the top. But first of all, try from from the square. So when you see it, so that's what no, one fit that so back to all still yeah just basically with the things not okay so I mean yeah so how's your character going? So can I still yeah on just not his hand plate like in no place. So has it been since Peter? That's what you guys go to. That's what we start.
We drove around. Um, yeah, we did go to Jamaican Kitchen this morning,
Okay,
which is awesome.
it's pretty good. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I love jerk chicken stuff and just like how just that whole spice mix.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. There's a couple of places around them that are just like you wouldn't guess it would be that.
It's weird. Like I noticed when I was in Japan,
Yeah.
they don't have nearly the variety of like foreign foods and like there's a million Japanese cuisine has like there's 6 different meals
Yeah.
that you can have kind of within it and like we do all these.
Yeah.
Most restaurants do that. And then but there's going to be one place like in Kyoto, which is like a 1 million, it's a city like 1 million people.
Yeah.
There's like one place that does Mediterranean food, but quite good.
Yeah.
There's like 3 places that do tacos. They're almost all excellent. Like, and like the guy, there's just like a thing where you're like, if you find a restaurant in Japan, it's probably quite good.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy how
That's
high the standards are, or at least in Kyoto.
yeah. And not known for super. Not so.
Um,
What? Overmade sandwich. It's sad.
uh, I I was surprised at how much I liked Nine Souls actually.
So,
Have you played that?
oh no.
So that was like May of last year. That was the Taiwanese team that did Devotion and Detention. And they did like the pitch on that is it's a 2D Souls. Like
Okay.
that's totally the pitch. And it's really more of a Sekiro like. Uh it's like it looks like a comic book. It's like and all the characters are cats. So they've also got that going for them.
Uh, so, so, so as we were driving back,
Uh-huh.
GDC,
Yeah.
I kept fading in and out. We kept seeing Teslas, and I kept, and we had kept it, and because we got bonuses,
Mhm.
GDC, I was thinking about pigs. So I kept
Sure.
so I was like thinking about robotic pigs. And I was like,
Sure.
and after we talked about what was it? Uh his samurai game.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, what if it was like kind of robotish samurai and like the pigs
Sure.
coming down from the
You were quite sleep deprived at this point.
I was just second off to stay asleep. Yeah. I was just
Dude, I don't know how to keep falling asleep too. The music was blasting.
yeah, music was blasting, conversation was good. And then the next day I was sad.
Oh, we were all
I'll do it.
Yeah. I'm so sad. So no. But yeah, so it was like where things are coming down and just I was when I'm not listening is when
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that can be good. And like, it's weird how much you believe your dreams. Like it has emotional resonance and it can be hard because that like disappears and you go, oh, what happened to it? Like, oh, I missed that. But uh yeah, there's kind of an ideation that you can get into just by kind of like dozing and stuff.
working at two lines, like I'm sure the guys like, oh, I'm not here fun. And it's straight at
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I can get started on this if you guys are ready.
I don't think
I'm good. I had Jamaican kitchen. hmm So, this is about the first 5 minutes of your game. You guys have probably heard this talk. You've probably seen James do it. Let me go over it quickly, and then we'll kind of go into we'll pick a game to kind of designer play, and also apply this stuff to it. So the first 5 minutes of your game are the most important 5 minutes of your game. They're more important than the next few hours of your game because 80% of players are going to decide if they're going to keep playing in those first 5 minutes. And it's even worse if you're a free-to-play game and they have very low attachment to you. If they paid you money already, you've at least got them for a little bit. We also do such a bad job with the first 5 minutes. So many games are telling you things that are boring that they feel like are the developers have misjudged what's important to players in those first 5 minutes because they're thinking about it in a lot of ways they're thinking about it mechanically rather than appealing to what the players are actually looking for. So we need to create a good one. What are the pillars that we have to use? We need to prepare the player to enjoy the game. This is very similar to that thing I was talking about where you're setting expectations for what the game is and you're needing to meet them. We need to show them the promise that the game has to offer. This is very much about selling them on stuff that they will see in the future that they're not going to be able to see yet. We need to teach them the mechanics of the game. We need to give them a space to practice so that they don't feel like they're a failure, that the game is not going to give them space to learn. We need to offer that space and kind of promise that it's going to work. And then we need to show them that there will be a reward for this work that they're going to do. Okay, so let's talk about preparing the player. This one is kind of the weirdest and the hardest to define, but it's about the emotions that the player is going to have and subconsciously preparing them to get into a state where they're going to give your game a chance. You want them to be ready to think about what's cool about your game. We work as designers as much on the player's subconscious as their conscious. A lot of what we're doing is setting the stage for an emotional experience to happen on players that our conscious message that we're telling them is going to resonate with and is going to make sense with that. The best design in a lot of our cases is a design that players don't actually notice, but is going to be improving the game. It's that you've prepped the stage so that they're understanding what's going to happen. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, if you've ever done something like you pick up a game and you think it's going to be an action game and you find out it's a puzzle game, that's kind of a disappointing experience. If it's like a rhythm game and you play it and you realize that it is more of a puzzle game, it's because your expectations have been prepared incorrectly. And all of this work was done to the wrong cause, and it's just going to set people up for disappointment. Now, of course, you might just think that's setting a better store page, like preparing your marketing better, but it actually goes into more than that, and it actually goes into the game itself. This is still an experience that you're building as the players launch your game. For example, it's really important about the mood that exists. Okay, while you recognize the screen and you know kind of what the game is like, when you hit the screen when Genshin Impact loads, the music that plays sounds like this. Be a little bit louder. Okay, so feel that. And what kind of mood are you getting from that?
Oh,
Calm? I think there's more of a promise of something though. It's musical. It's musical music. Whimsical? Okay, yeah. We're using a flute instead of like a brassier instrument. Um, yeah, but what kind of fantasy? Like, is this like a Lord of the Rings fantasy? Okay. What kind of fantasy would you call it?
within pilots.
Hmm. There's definitely, I think the picture, it goes well with the picture. It's a very specific, like, airy fantasy about a place that is calmer than the place that you might currently be in right now. And I think this is also, it's really interesting because it's not, uh, it's telling you about the pace of the game that you're about to play. Like, what do you expect to happen in the first 5 minutes of the game after hearing that music? Sure, if you're listening to this, you're like, I'm expecting the walking, right? You're not expecting super high octane action right away. It's not going to be like Devil May Cry or something, right? It's not even like Diablo, which has the kind of removed control scheme, but it's still a lot of action going on in it. So this is a game that is kind of selling you on the world, and it wants to sell you on the story and kind of being a place that you can escape to. And so it's positioning itself in that in a very different way. And that is the same for all of the imagery. This is something that is very peaceful, very beautiful, very appealing, and it's not selling an adventure or a bunch of action or a bunch of crazy stuff that's going to be happening. This part is really important too. This is kind of how they build it. Do you guys know what this does? Right. That's a huge part of how fantasy stories work. A ton of fantasy stories are about going into another world. That's totally the metaphor they're working with here. And even if players don't recognize exactly what it is, that's what they're doing. So what they could have done is had the music be like this. So if you heard this and then you started the game, what would happen to your emotions?
It would be the
Okay. And so how would you treat those? Because like, how long does it take in Genshin before you get to fight stuff? It takes like 5 minutes or something like that. Yeah, like I think they do walking tutorials. You do a bunch of that before that point. That whole time you're not getting to do any of that. So it's going to be disappointing and boring if that's the imagery that you set people up with. They're probably going to stop and they're probably going to walk away disappointed as a result of that. Okay, contrast it with Fortnite. So this is like a teaser and a launch screen for Fortnite. So this is how they're selling a new season of the game. So what they want is they want it to be super energetic. They want it to be zany. They want to give a feeling that like anything is possible. But more than that, what they want to prep you with, and really, look at how he's holding his jacket. They want to prep you with the fact that a huge part of Fortnite is character customization, is getting cool looks that you can buy and collect and have that and show off with it. They want you to be able to say, I can make my own personal style in this game. You're cool. You're an action hero, which is what they're doing. But you also have your individuality. You have your own style, which you only get to do by making cosmetic purchases in the game. And if you look really carefully, and like there's even different styles going on, I think there's at least 12 totally different styles in this. Yeah, which very specifically communicates that they're prepping you to find one that you really like and pick that one and identify with it and make that the core of your fantasy for Fortnite. And it preps their players to be ready to make that, like to make purchasing looks a core part of the experience. Here's another example. So it's 2001. Shooters are big and they're growing on console, but they pull from a few core fantasies. There's like a Space Marines and Aliens fantasy, like you see in Doom and Quake. And then there's a World War II fantasy. So Saving Private Ryan has just come out. Medal of Honor is big. Call of Duty, the first Call of Duty is going to come out pretty soon. And so Halo's a space shooter. It's got a bunch of those same aesthetic tropes. I mean, literally, you are a faceless soldier in power armor. You're fighting alongside the Marines from Aliens, and you're fighting a bunch of hordes of enemies. But then they set the music in the title screen like this. Okay, so what's that doing to your expectations? Yeah,
It's further.
totally, totally. Yeah, yes. It's a big scale. Yeah. What does the title screen to Doom look like? Uh, they usually do one of their drawings, like their art for the hero shot of like the 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 Doom guy fighting the demons, right? And there's no characters in this. There's not even a spaceship in this. I think a lot of it is specifically contrasting it against what player expectations were for a shooter, and especially for a sci-fi shooter at the time, and using that as a point of differentiation with those other games. So it is also broadening its reach. Like they know how big the box is for players who are playing a space shooter, and they want to say, we want to appeal to more people outside of that. Maybe this is a way to do it. I think it's very cinematic, and I think the music is actually not that far off from what sci-fi movies would use as music. And I think that's a different kind of confidence than what games have. A lot of games are, a lot of games are very much top of the line. They need to tell you everything needs to be reinforcing what their core appeal is. A lot of movies, because they know that you've already started watching the movie, are willing to pick a more unique score that's going to set the ambiance of the movie rather than say, this is very similar to other things that you already like. So I think with this, they're showing that they have the confidence to set it in a more cinematic scape and say, this is what we sound like, and it will all make sense. Keep in mind also that this is still a really different context from a free-to-play game because this is a premium game. Somebody has already bought this and already gone home, and so they are going to give them a little bit more time. I think this would be much harder to pull off if you were a mobile free-to-play game and somebody's just downloaded it. So the commandments of player preparation. You want to keep it short. You want to know your player. You want to have an idea of what type of person would be playing your game so that you are specifically appealing to them. Usually you want to keep it skippable as well. If it's very cool, keeping it, the shortest way to keep it is to allow people who are frustrated with it to message that to you and say, I don't want to look at that. And finally, you do need to know your game. And what I mean by that is have identified the core emotions that you think are appealing and are actually going to work on players. So you can't design this in a vacuum. It has to be reinforcing everything else that you're going to do. With that, we want to move on to the second part, which is showing them the promise. So there was a time when maybe 3 games came out a month and players would give you lots of time. They would have paid you up front. But that's totally not true. And it's especially not true even if you are a premium game, you still are positioning yourself through your marketing and through your trailers about what's cool about your game. So with the overwhelming amount of choices that people have, if you don't hook them right away, they're just going to move on. They're just going to assume that it fits in a bucket of stuff that they've already seen, and leave right there. Most games are going to start with a tutorial because that is pretty important. You want the player to be able to move around. But if you're clicking through text boxes and that's all you're doing and it's not actually engaging with the game, a ton of players are just going to bounce off because you still need to fulfill this before you can before you can fit it into. You still need to show them the promise about your world before they're going to be willing to sit through your tutorials. So, for example, Breath of the Wild. If you think about how that game starts, what does it do? Okay, you do wake up in a cave. How long do you spend in the cave? Okay, okay. What all do you learn to do in the cave? Okay, so I think that those are things that they felt like were bare minimum stakes that they had to teach the player to keep going. But as soon as you get out of the cave, you get a vista, and it looks like this. And this isn't even because you're still on the broken plateau. They still have more to show you, but they know that this is enough. This is the cell, and they're like, but we're holding behind our hands on one up here and one up here as well. Totally. This is the promise of the like this is the whole pitch of the game right there. This is what they what they built the box on. This is what communicates why it's different than other Zelda games. Um, and so they know that they need to get to this as fast as possible. Even if you are stuck on the plateau for a good 4 or 5 hours. But the plateau itself is also the whole game in a 4 or 5 hour chunk, and then they're like, and here's the rest of the game. It's actually the same thing, but it's 10 times bigger. Something really different. Raid Shadowlands. This is a mobile like party RPG. Yeah. What are they selling here? Being on a team? Well, you can't even see their faces though. What's the fantasy? What's the emotion that they're selling here? Yeah, you get to fight a dragon. There may be dragons in Zelda, but they're not selling it on that, right? They're selling it in this. What else? What else are they selling? Mm. Yeah.
Have like a little party like through dungeons, that kind of like dungeon.
Okay. Yeah, like you get to fight. I think my context is that you're fighting in huge monsters and taking their treasure. Um, and this also means something, on a mobile handheld. You're like, wow, this feels epic in scope for the platform that I'm doing it on. Of course, the reality is that this is not what you're doing when you start the game. This is what you get to at the end. And they thought it was really important to give you a taste of what it would look like at the end before you actually started playing the game. They thought it was way more valuable, even if they had to take this away, that you can see this and hold this in your mind. So along those lines, and I don't know if you can kind of see this. So this is the opening of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. You guys remember how that game opens? Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Do you remember how that opens? Sure. So what is that? What is the promise that you're getting? Totally. Yep. 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 And they kind of double did this as well because they even started with you fighting Dracula as another character. So like you start at the top of the castle, you walk up the stairs, it's super epic, you fight Dracula, and then you win, and it's like, good job. Now let's start the next game. So you've also sold the promise of what Alucard's goal is going to be in the game. So if you can show them something amazing right away, you've got something to keep them promise for the rest of it. You need to have identified what that core fantasy of your game is. It needs to be as strong as your core pitch, and it probably is your core pitch, but it needs to express it in a way that's you think is the most appealing way and make them believe that in the first 15 minutes. In terms of mechanics, although the player can't play with your mechanics at a high level when they first start, if you can find a way to show them some of those effects, it can be very effective. This is something that there's some ways to do this that kind of go in and out of fashion. Like for a while, very similar to the Symphony of the Night thing, giving you a brief play as a super powerful character was pretty popular. I think if it becomes too popular and becomes cliched, it loses impact. Maybe it's not very popular anymore, and maybe you can get away with that now again. Doing very flashy and appealing stuff is very useful. And if you can try and find a way to make that experience give the player uh, the aesthetic, like if it's a game that makes the player feel powerful, that's very straightforward to get there. But if it makes them feel smart, giving them your most clever but easiest puzzle can kind of get that across. What you need to do in the beginning of the game is teach them how to play the game. Yeah.
I don't see many games involved.
Mhm.
Starting off with like a very well-known, fairly strong, very strong kind of makes that makes all those things kind of come together.
Yeah.
Star Wars: The Force Unleashed.
Yep. Force Unleashed did it.
Plays Darth Vader.
So what is the promise that they're selling in Force Unleashed? Right. The promise that they're saying is not you get to play as Darth Vader, but it's you're going to have a guy that will be like Darth Vader, right? So here's what the Force can do. Here's what you can do with the Force. You'll get to it.
Use the dark side.
That was a big part of their marketing too.
What the difference is, what a Sith Lord is versus what
Right. So if it was Jedi Knight, would it make sense to start the game by playing as Yoda? Like, that fantasy doesn't really work. It's like a fantasy of living in a hut for 30 years. But is that your promise? It would be an interesting start if the game's promise was that you could somehow drop all desire.
Sort of. It starts very you know, in the movie not too far. You get a part somewhere in 166. Within the general.
Sure. Start with that's kind of how the new Jedi game opens. What the new Jedi game, yeah, Fallen Order, it opens with you on a Star Destroyer running away. And so then what you get to do is take down the people who like attack the Star Destroyer later on. I think so. Yeah, it's a useful image. And then at the end of the game you fight Darth Vader. Sure. Sure.
Or not.
Sure. So while you are showing them the promise and doing all this, you also need to, of course, teach your game. And when I say teach their game, you need to make them practice your game because anything that we teach you can't do once, you have to repeat it several times for somebody to learn it. So, as we mentioned earlier, you can't just throw text on the screen. You need to keep it engaging. It needs to be engaging. If they are bored, they're not learning. If they're not learning, they're not going to be ready to play the rest of the game, and they'll probably stop playing the game. So, going to go through this. I bet a lot of you guys have seen this, but it's so clear in how it communicates that it's so useful to kind of refresh on this. So Mario 1-1 in Super Mario Brothers is such a good tutorial. We need to, as kind of the tenet of any good tutorial, is that you explain something and then you make them practice it. So what does it take? You need to figure out what the player absolutely needs. And you need to kind of cut this down. Does the player need to learn how to use your shop to play this game? If not, we can put that later. Does the player need to learn how to how to use their advanced abilities? Like in Mario, there's a bunch of power-ups. Those are not all in here because that stuff is going to come later. Once you've stopped holding your hand, then they can, once you've stopped holding the player's hand, they can kind of pick that stuff up a lot later. You need to think about the specific order that they need to learn things. They need to be able to walk before they can jump or before they can take action on things. And you need to get them to do all that. And you need to know when you need them to know those things. So if you are making puzzles or combat challenges, you have a list of things like prerequisites of player knowledge that need to happen before that point. If the player needs to meet this Goomba, they need to know how to jump. Otherwise, they will die. And that means that you actually need the players to learn it themselves rather than just have you tell it to them. So, this is the beginning of the game. It's a little bit shrunk. Where do you start on the screen? On the left. And what does it tell you? Okay, because you can't go left. Very straightforward. And a lot of these things are a lot simpler in this game because the rules of the game that they've set up are much simpler. So they have a much easier task than what we do in more complex games. But you want to get as close to that. You want to pull off as many of these tricks as you can. What else is on the screen?
Background elements that we can do.
Not in the background. What other gameplay elements are on the screen? Sure. The time is ticking down, so you got to do something. Anything else? Sure. This is the beginning of the game. What else? The ground? Sure. This is playable. This is not. They'll teach you that pretty fast. Yep. You can't go back. Yep. I don't think there's anything else. There's nothing else that is in your way that is like distracting you. There's enough to make it not look like an older, simpler game, like it actually has a background. But there is nothing that is going to act on the player until they act. The player is free to, except for the time, which is 400 seconds, so they don't have to do it right away. The player is free to kind of move around and figure out what they're actually doing. So once you go right, this is the first thing that you see. You see all these flashing blocks, which is a lot more flashing blocks than you're going to get everywhere else in the level. Yeah. Yep. Uh-huh. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, the original cartridge limit was, how big was it? Was it 8 kilobytes? It was something like that. And they had to do, that is all that the NES can address in terms of memory. So they had to build bank switchers. So you flip a bit and it'll route to another memory bank in the cartridge when you give it a certain address. So what happens is your address is the bank command and then the 8-bit address within the next thing that you want to get to. But the whole way that this is set up is like, what is cheap? What is cheap is toggling between palettes rather than actually defining. They're not memory mapping every pixel. Okay, so in terms of what the player actually cares about, we've got these flashing blocks. We don't put 4 flashing blocks together ever, like in this first level, because they don't need that many. We don't need to space our rewards that close together. But because this is the first one, and we need to make sure that they understand what these are, we're going to put a lot of them. Because we're not going to, there's not a wall that says you can't go until you've hit a flashing block. We need to set up the conditions for them to do it. So what's going on with this guy right here, who's walking under these blocks? What's the only way to get past him? Yeah, you jump. And what happens when you jump? Yep. You'll hit the nothing blocks. You'll hit the question mark blocks. It's pretty easy to hit the question mark blocks because you can hit them in between and hit 2 at a time. And if you don't do that, you die. And so there's no way to get past this without jumping. And if you jump earlier, you'll still have this block as well. What happens once this mushroom spawns? Moves away from you. Because what does that do for you in terms of learning? Okay. It like encourages you to move that direction? Sure. What does it do once it falls off? Yeah, it hits the pipe and comes back at you. So it's actually, it's really hard to actually miss it. It also teaches you something about the physics of the objects in the game. So why is this pipe this tall as opposed to shorter or taller?
As long as you're in mushrooms, types, like
Do you need the mushroom to get past it? Sure. That is the standard jump height. That's the minimum jump height. That's what it is. Yeah. So this is different and this is different because if you just tap the button as quick as you can, you're not actually gonna make it past these. So what you need to learn in order to progress past this is that you can jump that high, yeah. And it also teaches you this is different than like Mario Brothers or earlier platformers. This has the variable timing that you can press the button. It's going to feel different. Um, why is this space here in terms of level when there's an enemy right here? Why isn't there an enemy here?
kind of TV don't pay like the reset on the back.
Do you need to jump? Well, I think that would be true if this pipe was like this tall and you could only get to it from there. But if we want them to learn, if your normal jump, which can take you here, is that high, then then we don't need to set that up that way to do that. Yeah,
So you can teach the player one thing and that's jumping.
sure.
And the later one is like push the thing.
Sure. So like in terms of complexity for the player, is it different? What's different about the complexity of this area from this area? Yeah.
Potential. So it's like
Ten so tension, is it tension? I think it's real danger because like you will actually die if you screw that up.
second more potential.
Sure. Sure. This is a super important part of the repetition because this is where they need to make more jumps, but they're making it outside of danger. So to get past here, you would have had to jump once and then twice. This space, you're going to have more practice of the jump before you get to another actual dangerous encounter. This one specifically is, I believe, running jump height. So this is, you have two options. You either have to do the jump from pipe to pipe or you have to do the running jump. So here's another thing. As soon as you get this, what do you need to do to get past this? Jump, right? And how big is it? It's 2 tiles wide. How big are the pipes? So how different mechanically is this from this? It's very similar, yeah. Right. So now that we've had them do 1, 2, 3 pipes, we have the pipe, we have the gap that you have to jump where if you don't jump early enough, if you don't jump early enough here, you just stop. If you don't jump early enough here, you fall down. Okay, so there's one other really crazy thing that's happening. Where do you actually need to jump to get over here? Like where are the safe spots? Is this, you can jump here, right? Can you jump here? If you jump here, are you okay? I think so. What if you jump here? What's gonna happen to you? Right. Where you probably do this, right? But you'll hit the block. So that actually makes this jump a lot easier because there are less places you can jump that you will land in the pit and die to. And you also get a cool secret. The other interesting thing is because this is actually This isn't gated on, can you demonstrate to me that you can jump 3 times, and now I will let you go through by pressing the jump button 3 times. This is actually in context of the game. The player feels like they're playing the game. The player is playing the game. And the player also needs to demonstrate enough skill to get past this point to keep playing the rest of the game. So it's super, super, super effective. So that just leaves us with the payoff to all the stuff that you've been showing them in these first 5 minutes. At the end of your tutorial, or whatever you think might be the first like play session for the player, you want to reward them both to make them feel good and also to make them feel like they're going to lose something if they don't keep playing your game. Maybe a little bit less nice. So sometimes that can just be a bunch of loot. Objects, in terms of items, are a lot more desirable than currency. Like money is a lot more abstract of a concept. But you do want to strike a balance and not overwhelm people. 200 gems are not necessarily going to mean as much to a player as a mantle of vitality, but you do want to make sure that this has something about it that feels cool, even if they don't understand what it is. There's a couple things to note here, and this is really common in like teaching shop tutorials. Players don't like to be forced to spend the currency that you're giving them at this point. So especially if it's a system where you need them to know how the shop works. There's a big difference between saying, in order to get out of this, you have to buy the specific thing that every single player has to do, versus letting them choose to buy something or not and leave. And so you need to make that decision about how you're going to be able to let them continue while still showing them that. You also want to make sure with this that whatever reward you're giving is not going to trivialize the next hour of gameplay. There's a lot of games that, it can be kind of easy to say, well, why don't we make this so awesome that we're showing them the power promise and try and put that moment here. Well, if you've done that, you're still really early in the game. And if you've immediately proved that your game is going to be boring, that's not really going to help a lot. Remember also that there's a lot of ways to do rewards. Rewards are not just items. Depending on what you're doing and what your player is looking for, part of your game narrative can be a really good reward. Uh, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, the end of its opening section does this is why the game is different than the other game. That was part of their hook. It's like, here's the old game that looks like this, and they also thought it was very important to show you that the game was going to be different. I don't know if that pays off, but that was at least part of their promise. You can also do new mechanics or abilities if the player is at a place where they can understand that. You can do stuff like, you have to be really careful about this by deciding what is going to look overwhelming and versus what is going to look enticing. And a lot of that is based on what you think your player is like. A game like Path of Exile, its player is very specifically people who have played a lot of Diablo. Like, they're not trying to appeal to something else. So what their promise is this is more than Diablo. Finally, rewards can come in the form of letting players do something that they couldn't do. The thing about like the way that a lot of the match games work with their power-ups, when they give you this early, this goes away, and so it is something that you can get later, but you can see its effects right now. So that tells you about stuff that will exist in the game and that will continue to happen, but they don't have to make this an ability that you get and they're trivializing the next few hours of the game. Okay, are there any other ones that you can think of in terms of the first 5 minutes that are awesome? I just want a couple. What's awesome about the beginning of Path of Exile? What's awesome about the first 5 minutes of Path of Exile?
First weapon, your first ability,
Okay.
they kind of give you a linear path into a boss.
All right. You're like, are you shipwrecked at that point?
Yes.
Okay. So you have an ability. Do you use it on anything?
There's boss.
Okay.
Pass them, fight them roll with your ability,
Okay.
and then by the end of it, you'll have to fight a boss, which is mandatory.
Okay. Okay.
And you can find an ability on the way as well.
Okay.
And then you can see the differentiation between your main ability and the ability to support.
Okay. So here are my questions. So before that, how have you been prepared for the beginning of Path of Exile? I think you are, because I think you probably know what Path of Exile is, right? So you've got all the marketing, everything that drove you to install the game. You've got the title screen and like the character selection. There's some character creation in there, right? How is that set up? What does that look like?
It's not character creation. It's kind of just picking out your character class and
Sure,
say pick a name.
sure. But like, is it on a gray screen or are they doing stuff with that time?
No, they have all the different classes that one goes.
Okay,
Pick what class that gives you a little bit of lore,
sure.
and then pick a neutral.
What do the classes look like?
So it's Marauder, Ranger, Templar, and Witch.
Sure. Well, how are they dressed?
Sorry,
How are they dressed?
very minimalist there.
I think, if I remember right, I think they have late game equipment on. And when you click on them, they get the starting equipment? Okay,
Very swap armor.
okay.
Stuff.
Hmm. Okay. I know that one of the things that they are selling is how dark fantasy the world is. And I know that one of their promises is that this is going to be dark fantasy, unlike, they're positioning themselves against the image of Diablo 3 at the time. So that was very important to them. What about, how are they teaching you?
There is a small tutorial which I've skipped every time, so I don't actually know how to go over this.
Mhm. So you're not a good audience for that. Is there repetition in that opening segment?
It's quite a lot because you see this, you see a little bit, you see the first like kind of mobs in the game,
Okay,
different kinds of abilities they have, but it's when you see the first two, they're all the same for that first level. And then the big differentiations boss.
okay.
It kind of combines all of the abilities.
What does the boss do to you?
It fights.
Can you lose?
Oh yeah,
Okay, is that important?
yes.
Why is that important?
Because if you die, you have to restart it, and lose the next beat. And
Well, what does that say about the promise of your game compared to other games?
it's hard.
Okay, no, totally. That's part of our appeal, right? That Path of Exile is Diablo for hardcore players, right? So they need to message that, and they need to set up a scenario where you could die early.
There's a lot of mobs open, so there's a lot of potential to die in the first place.
Okay, and they're okay with that. Okay, because they're positioning as hardcore Diablo, right? Cool. Another one? Yeah.
Except for Mega Man, but moving straight to the States.
Yes. What does that say?
You don't have a long flexibility between how you can go through the gate and you're
Sure. Do you remember what it says on that screen? There's like one line of text.
like on this guy. There's like 14 mobs.
Yep.
It's like the I think that these models have this animal without actually because there's actually
Mhm. Yeah. Let's see. So we have the title screen. Okay. What does it say? Okay. Great. This is not. This is new at times. This is super novel, which is why this is effective as a promise. Because what is this promising to me? What's new about that experience? Sure, you can pick. Well, these are picking stages. That's why it's probably important that it says select stage. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think these look like, if we know that we're Mega Man, I think it's probably not that hard to read these as bosses. So, especially in the NES, I think bosses were a big selling point. So one of the promises I'm getting is that there are 6 bosses in this game, at least. Yeah, they always do clear it, and then the Wily stage appears, and the Wily stage is usually super long, and then it has a boss redux in it, along with some new bosses, which is it's a specific design where getting past all these 6 kind of feels like an endpoint, so it feels like an accomplishment, and that is a certain difficulty level, and beating the Wily stage is much, much, much more difficult. So a reasonable amount of accomplishment for finishing this, even if you can't beat the game. I want to look at the presentation of this once they pick it. Oh, hey, go back one frame. Oh, come on. Okay. What did that just show me as a player? Sure, 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 sure. It does. What kind of a motivator is this for players? Like, what does this do to you as a player?
It's sort of, it's, yeah, everything you're used to, I sort of like,
Yeah, I think it's really similar to like when I was talking about if a bunch of gold comes out of the guy. Like, what does that actually do? Like, it is very abstract. You don't know what this means. You don't know what scores are. So it's using the concept of there will be a lot of points. Don't worry, there's like 100,000 right here. That'll be awesome, and you'll get that. But yeah, I agree. I think the boss itself is the most important part of this promise, and the cinematic kind of nature of it is just emphasizing that itself. Um, cool. I think what we should do is grab an NES game specifically and do that same first 5 minutes with it. Hey, does somebody want to man? I need somebody to man the controller. Sure, go for it. Hopefully that'll work from that distance. Okay, if I load up Super Mario Brothers 3, okay, go away. There we go. Immediately things are going to start happening. And this stuff that's happening is actually super important. Okay, what has happened so far? Okay, what does that tell you? But it's not a Goomba or anything, right? Yeah. But can you do that? You can do that in Mario Brothers, but you couldn't do that in Super Mario Brothers. So we're gonna have some of that in this. What else is going on here? Yeah, totally. It's not just Mario and an enemy. And in fact, it's not Mario at all, is it? It's actually Luigi that starts. What else happened? Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. So what does that do as a framing device for you?
differentiates a lot from the first game.
Hmm. Feels different. So you've got like a new art style. Where does that set your expectations for what will happen in the game? Okay, it's different. And I think that is important because, we are dealing with mostly square tiles, so we need to take effort for that. Yeah,
Kind of like a three aesthetic.
yeah, totally. No, I think that is really important. Like, for one thing, this is still the age, these sprites are pretty low resolution, they don't have a lot of colors. So we need to suggest what is going on in this case in a lot of ways. The box art will be very illustrated and it will show something very different. At this point, the manuals that games always came with, very often they would have a list of all the enemies with a drawing of them and kind of a name and a lot of times a description. So that was like a part of the fantasy. Um, having a super explicit device, like this is like a play, is going to do a lot to prepare you for how to receive that. Is it horrifying that the king has been turned into a snake, or is it kind of funny? You know? Okay, what's going on?
Yeah, setting back with this value.
Yeah, that was cool. Um, I mean, I think that's a cool. That's kind of a tech show off. Like that's not easy to do with different backdrop layers moving around on the NES. So on its own, that's kind of impressive. What else happened? Yeah, totally. They just felt like a jackpot, you know. And look, it's there's a mushroom, there's a green shell, there's whatever the heck this is, there's whatever the heck this is. Yeah, what else is going on?
There's 104,000 your power on the channel.
Totally. They're super into that. They're like, hey, this is gonna be awesome. And they know that this is the coolest thing. Because what does this do? It lets you fly. That's amazing. What else is going on? Yeah,
Respect to the stuff, so that kind of fills up the plays. Then
I think that's important. And what's weird, and this is hard to understand, is that that is a game mechanic as well. We're gonna reiterate that in the next 3 seconds or whatever. What else? Anything else you can see? Yeah,
Just built along percent, but reinforces the save point is set because you
Mhm.
can see the same with gas traps.
That's cool, and it's a lot of fun too. Okay, what just happened? Two things just happened that are super important.
So you can forward, you can see the power.
and then it's not back there, still behind.
Holy. What happened with this too? Yeah, didn't kill you. It just fell from the sky and it bonked you in the head. So there are specific rules about this that we're going to see reiterated. This is not instant death, right? Oh, did you see how easy that was compared to doing that if you don't have the ability to glide down? Like that right there is a huge power promise from what you can do without it. Okay, what just happened there? Is that what you would expect to happen from playing the first game? I think so, yeah. But the specific, well, it did show the kicking animation, which is really neat. Yeah, what just happened?
That is sort of you can pick up here in the middle.
That's great. That's great to know too, because that's pretty hard to learn. Because what you need to do is hold a button that normally doesn't do something obvious. It's the run button, right? And you need to move while holding and then you need to release it. Like that's in terms of the number of actions that you're doing with your two different hands, that's actually fairly significant. What else was going on there? Yeah. So how would you describe that as like an emotive experience? Like as an emotional experience? So like he kicks the shell, right? And then Luigi walks back with the shell. And then he throws it and Mario stops it and Mario kicks it back there, right? And then it goes here. Luigi runs away. And then it comes back and hits him. How was that as an emotional experience?
Well, don't be surprised.
It was surprising, yeah. What else? What did it make you feel? Yeah,
Sounds like slapstick comedy too.
really. I think it was funny. Like, it wasn't that we could have set this up so that Luigi threw it. And like that's a beat, because the beat was Mario throws it, and then Luigi comes back holding it. That's like a mini beat. Mario throws it at or Luigi throws it at Mario. That could have been it, because it's kind of a like revenge comedy slapstick beat. But that's not good enough. It's much funnier if Mario throws it, it doesn't hurt Luigi, but it hurts Mario. So you're hurting yourself. What else is going on there? Yeah. I think so. I think so. 100%. Well, and like Mario Brothers has Mario and Luigi, and it's got the screen wrap. It's got all that. So I think we're totally getting that promise of having that in there. Okay, that was actually super important. What just happened there? Yeah, yeah. So what do you think? What do you think as a player that means? If this is your first time playing it, it was secret and surprising. I think it connects to this and the fact that we've got this theme of shadows. Do you guys remember how the secrets work in some of the levels in this game? Because this is actually when we're talking about the secret in the first game. You know, when you have the pit that you jump over and there's the invisible block that you're likely to hit if you're failing. That was it wasn't done according to a method that the player can learn. That was done as a surprise to catch the player and kind of it gives them a moment of surprise and also happiness because it's a very nice reward for them. This secret, because there's a mechanic in this game where you can sometimes go behind the stage to find secret stuff, is not something that the player can do accidentally. So they are specifically building up, they're giving you a hint to one of the big game secrets, and they're also teasing it as something that can happen in the game. There's another thing that was happening with that, which is a technical show off, which is that the NES can only draw background layers behind the sprites. So normally sprites can never go behind background tiles. So the way that these actually turned into sprites when you did that, or they probably spawned sprites right there, right when that happened. Okay, what is going on now? Because now we are actually done with our opening scene, but we're kind of not done. So how would you describe what's going on? Also, why is it not playing sound? Oh, this part doesn't do sound, does it? What do I know? What do I have to do to start playing the game immediately? Actually, yeah, I think that's super important. Um, because that immediately tells you what the game can do. Actually, the way that it's mapped, I think I've got the home button here. I can get out of it if you want. So I actually put the select button is this middle one right there. Yep. So yeah, that's super weird. But yeah, this is important to kind of, especially at this point, you're demonstrating different game modes and possibilities that exist in within this game. Why don't you go ahead and start the game? There we go. I think it's the big blue start button. Okay, this is already super different than the first game. What happens when you start Mario 1? Totally, totally different. And this doesn't look anything like the title screen, right? This doesn't look like a Mario level either. So what am I looking at, and what is it doing in terms of player promise? It's a world, yeah. I've got context for like, and they even drew so like there's a moat with a castle and like a cool bridge over it. I think that's cool. Yeah, yeah. Tell me about the enemy. Well, I don't have. I mean, these levels have enemies, but it's not drawing anything there, right? Like, what do I get by seeing a guy here? Like, you see something that you'll be able to fight, and not only that, it's a little bit mysterious, so you want to know what it is. Tell me about the castle. Like, what is the castle doing for you? Yeah. There's other reasons why it stands out too. Yeah, this is animated, so this pops on and off. Yeah, Totally. What else has that color palette? Sure. Um, it's it stands out because nothing else uses these colors. And like this is the NES where you get 4 colors per layer. So they were extremely specific about putting a different color tile there. So that's super important. Like if they had used more colors in other areas of the map, this would stand out less. But they want you to look at that right away because it's so important. What else are you getting? Yeah. How do you know that? Ooh. So, shoot, what is in the box exactly? Actually, can we go back and hold on? I want to see exactly what's in that box when you spawn. Okay. So what's being messaged here? Totally. I mean, that is incredibly important. This becomes more important when you're playing 2 player, so that it can call out the difference between the 2 players. What else are we getting?
That just happened just embodied humans for all.
Totally. And that, like, it could just, it doesn't need to say this. Like, you can tell that it's World 1, and it says it right here. So they didn't need to copy that messaging on here. And so by putting that, and what you do is you read it. You read World 1 for Mario's. So that is that messaging, that promise of more to come in the future. Do you guys have an idea why they did that transition there, the like stars to that? Because he could have just been on the map. Super useful, especially when literally every single one of these is moving all the freaking time. It can be kind of hard to see Mario. I honestly think that is a major reason they did that. Especially when you're switching between 2 players. If you've got one player here and one player here, when you switch control, it'll do that transition. So look at this. A shape that shrinks onto one location is one of the best ways to get somebody's eye. It works way better than this. This is like a tier below it. Doing the color thing is a tier below that. Like uh, movement that points to a specific thing is going to work better than movement just in general. Is going to work better than color. Um, is going to work better than just specific labels. Like this is important, but it's way down there. You have to get pretty far down before you read that. Is there anything else that you guys can think of in this? Yeah, sure. What are these doing? Hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. Um, in fact, you've got a big old HUD down here. I would say it's pretty unusual to draw your HUD in the world map. So why do you think they're drawing the HUD down here? In time, sure. I mean, uh, they're even drawing the time, which is kind of funny. What is this doing for your experience in the first 5 minutes of the game?
It shows the remains of resource recognition.
Yeah. This looks complicated, right? 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different things at least on this. Like, that's pretty crazy. But when you think about what the promise of this game is going to be the biggest and the craziest Mario game you've ever seen. They're choosing to give you the promise of more stuff and more depth. They're not focusing on this is easy to play and easy for anyone to pick up with. They still think they've got that covered. And what they're appealing to is people who have already played Mario, who have maybe played games a lot more complicated than Super Mario Brothers, and they want to say, look at how cool this is. This is actually going to stomp all the games that have come since that point. Um, I think there's one other thing. Let's talk about the map on its own and compare it to the Mega Man map because it's kind of the same thing that we got, right? Like, yeah,
Still a graphic map versus American, you can still see describe cat.
totally. So why is this here?
Talking this from doors and beats.
If there's a door with a lock symbol on it, what does that mean? There's got to be some way past that.
It is a castle close adjacent to that door, so
That's true.
so that's blocking your path, and there's east where you have to overcome.
Yeah,
There's more path to the second castle.
sure. Can you tell me why are we seeing these in here? We could have just said, here's the next level. And in fact, a lot of platformers with world maps only show you the next level. Why are they showing you all these levels? Yeah,
Showing like the cost of alternative paths as well. The players can expect like an entire level to be one of those nodes, then they can say to get to that house all the way over there,
sure,
take an extra.
sure. You definitely need that information to make a choice. At this point, you need to choose which way to go, certainly. What's the difference between choosing to go right and choosing to go down at that point? Sure, what else don't you get? Well, you don't get this, whatever this is. And you don't get this. But is that cool or is that bad? You can skip 2 levels. Like you can get here without even playing these levels. Can you do that in the first game? No, not at all. Well, yeah, sure, sure. Um, but what would be the difference if there was fog of war over the rest of the map? Like what would the promise of that be?
Balance the risk reward assessments, but
Okay.
intelligence plus damage.
Sure, totally. What does it do for your player promise? Like what are your expectations here versus if you see, hills with maybe a castle at the end? Yeah,
Player with no fog on board, it gives the player better kind of sense of the depth of the world, but without the player main six plus skills to learn experience.
mm. I think like depth might be a word. I think it's the promise of a bunch of different levels. Like when I look at this, these are so gameplay, like it only takes that for me to learn what these are. But these are Mario levels, and I know that there's going to be more Mario levels, as opposed to if you don't draw it, you're calling less attention to what that there's going to be this gameplay in the future. So I think that is actually super important. Finally, what do you think these are for? What do they look like? Yeah,
As well, but also it makes the continuous path discrete, so it tells you that you're going to stop at each
yeah, that's true.
node.
Sure. Well, although that's not what these do. This is like a branch point, but this is not a different waypoint, I actually don't have an answer. I think these are weird because they're coins, right? Like you can't pick them up and get anything out of them. They sure do. Yeah, I don't actually know why they did coins. Yeah, why don't you, unless you guys have anything else you want to say, yeah. Is that what a coin looks like in the game? I don't think so, because I think it's a lot bigger. It doesn't flash in the game.
I think it's should find that.
Can you do that with the NES? No. No, you are writing You are writing bits in your memory. That's all you got. There's no scaling. It is uh, what it is, super quick. So like, this is a background tile. So the background tile is going to be represented with a memory map. It's a map to memory locations on the cartridge, and then also a map to color palettes. So for, I don't remember exactly the tile size. It's something like 32 by something else. And it's actually a little bit bigger because the NES scrolls, so it's double wide or double tall. Each one is a memory location that's going to go to the cartridge, and it's going to pull the specific sprite layout in terms of a palette map. There's going to be one of four values. And so those are the four colors that are in the palette that it also maps to. So that's basically all you can do. It's going to draw the background first, and it's going to do the sprites, and it has a certain number of sprites, and those are also going to a memory location. It's just gonna straight up draw that onto the screen. The NES has, I think, 2 kilobytes of RAM, and cartridges are 8 kilobytes. And that 2 kilobytes is basically only enough to, you get like less than a kilobyte of program memory. The rest of it is entirely dedicated to storing the lookup tables for where to pull the assets in the game. Yeah, jump in. Okay, what are we seeing here, and how is it different than the first Mario Brothers game? Totally. There's a lot more going on. Is there a lot more gameplay going on? Totally. I think that, like, what do we have here? When we were talking about the left side of the screen, I think we're doing something really similar to that. Right. Like all the way up to here, there's nothing, which is pretty similar. But what's super important is if what I'm telling you guys is that this is actually really similar, this is kind of the first screen of Mario 1. What does it mean that we have this now?
There's still lots of room to see what
Room is a way to put it. Like, I think one of the things they did is that they rejiggered the scale of things so that they can fit more stuff on screen. I think that's part of their promise about why this is going to be bigger. This game does feel more technical than Super Mario Brothers, and it's a lot of it is because it feels like you have more space to move. This is actually something on a personal note. There's a huge difference in the way that platformers on the NES feel from like 16-bit platformers, because the screen resolution is the same between the two, but 16-bit platformers are technically capable, like very easily, characters are often this big. And what would that do to this game if you were this big? Yeah, yeah. What were you gonna say? Totally, totally. There's way less gameplay space if you're more zoomed in on that. And it's actually, some games handle it pretty well. Something like the Mega Man on 16-bit, he's basically that big. I think it's pretty poor compared to the NES ones because of that. So that's totally a decision they were making, but they were making a specific decision about this for a specific purpose. Like the appeal of that, the character was way bigger, more detailed. They looked impressive, and that was a specific appeal that they were making to players. What else is going on right here? Does that remind you of anything? Maybe from Super Mario Brothers 1? Really? What did we have in the other one? We had one, and then we had that before, and we had that, right? Were there five or are there just four in that one? I don't remember actually. Sure. So what's that doing compared to when we were talking about the spacing with the neutral blocks before? They've changed it, so there aren't neutral blocks. Why do you think they did that?
Make it a little bit more compact.
Sure. If you need, what do you mean by compact? Like, what are you saving?
A little bit space to keep the player a little bit more movement and player.
I don't, do we have space here? We have space here, right? But once we get in here, it gets pretty tight. I think there's two things going on. The first block in Mario 1 was 1 wide. This one's 2 wide. Yeah. It's like if you're trying to hit this one and you're late, you're gonna hit this one. Like you're not gonna miss. Um, because they do that, I think they decided that they don't need the second set of blocks because you're more likely to get it on the first one. So they're trying to do everything they can to cram all the lessons from that down into a smaller amount of space. Does it change anything that you see this guy right away?
There's a little.
He's got an outline now. He's got a way more definition. They did a much better job. Yeah.
That seems so. I think if I had made it, this is actually.
That is nice. That is handy that they've kind of demonstrated that. But in the other game, we didn't have him. In that game, if you stood there, all that would happen is time going down. If you stand there in this, what's going to happen, right? You're just going to keep coming.
Sounds good.
There totally is. Uh, I think that is a pretty significant difference. I think it does make the game higher pressure at the start, and um, I think the first level of Mario 3 is actually harder than the first level of Mario Brothers 1, like because of that. I think they're willing to do it. I mean, Mario is so big that they can afford that. Yeah, go ahead and kill him. I mean, tell me what's going on. Sure. It was not necessarily a new enemy, but this is the first pipe you see. Yeah. Uh,
What we say, height is the box that you first jump on.
yeah.
Jump on. And shows you can jump on the height as well. You say the height.
Sure. How does this enemy work?
You try to feel around the screen. Spirals.
Mhm. Yeah, that's super huge. Um, how do you know that? I don't think you can. Although they do make sure to draw the teeth. I think does his head go straight up right when you go over him? I don't actually remember. Does his head go upright when you're above him? Okay. Yeah, you definitely can't jump on him. Um, so there's an enemy in this first pipe. That's super different. But not only that, the enemy is shooting fireballs at you. What is that doing for you, and what is that telling you?
Kelsey, it's going to ask.
I think so. Like, would you ever have seen this in those first screens in Mario 1? So what assumption does that mean they're making about their players? In what? Because they have more life experience than before. I think that's closer. What were you gonna?
I mean, they were players or like,
I think so. I think, and this is a super dangerous decision to make, but I think they're willing to say, we know that almost every single player who had an NES has a copy of Super Mario Brothers. So we're willing to start this game at a level, we're going to put a lot of our old tutorial stuff in there, but we want to start it at a level that is much higher. Yeah.
They assume that if you play the first thing, you know you can't jump on draw, so they don't move that in the first place. Because that's it.
Sure. Totally. Um, what does it mean in terms of the player promise if the game is really hard right away? Like what is it telling you about what the next 80 levels are going to be like? Yeah, I think they're gonna be challenging. And if you think about the way that NES games were marketed, a lot of times they were marketed as like, this game is gonna be so challenging. It's gonna be so awesome. I think it's a super important part of the premise. Um, I think I think we'll go a little bit farther, finish the first level, and I think we can kind of call it for people. Does that sound good? Cool. So, and as you saw, the mushroom came out. If it had landed, it would land on this. Does that tell you something? Like it reinforces that these are platforms in that weird way. And more than that, these are a new mechanic that wasn't in the first game. What's that mechanic? Sure. Well, you can pass in front of them, but you can pass up, right? Yeah, they're one-way platforms. So super important for platformers did not exist in Mario Brothers 1. And when if the mushroom lands there, it's still going to hit the pipe and it's still going to go back at you. So they're still putting their old tutorial elements in that point. Oh, it's a coin. Now, there's something very strong being communicated right here. Did they do this in the first game? I don't think they did. Even though I think they mechanically could have, maybe they wouldn't have done it from the side.
I don't know. Sort of tough.
Okay. But this is in the first level. So right away, they have a mechanic that is non-obvious for how you get it. What does that do to your problem? What if you have no idea how to turn this on? I mean, you guys know you kick the shell and it pops up. What if you don't know that? What do you take away as a player from that? Yeah, like there's something that you don't understand, but it's not just a block, it's a block with an item in it. So there's gotta be a way in there. What's super important is that you can turn around, right? So this immediately makes it more puzzly, like, oh, that's nice of them. But they give you a little space that's bounded to think about what you could use to get this. And of course, the guy with the shell is right there. So there's a decent chance, as long as you kick it right, it's gonna hit that thing. And then as soon as it does that and it goes back, it's gonna be safely in here. And because if you walk off this, you're not gonna fall down there. So it's actually pretty hard for you to hit this lowest level.
For
Mhm.
the small dodge.
Yeah, totally. You've seen it demonstrated. So right away, how long does it take to get a power up like this in the first Mario Brothers?
So we go through like another 20,000 from like this is really similar to like lots of games that
Sure. But we're like 2 screens in, and we're already getting the brand new power up. And this is not just a power up. This is the headline power up for the game. So there's a secret to get it, but it's also really fast if you know how. This is it's super important to show your best cards right away to fulfill that promise. Like if this was because this is the ultimate power, you could have done this like 5 levels in, like that's where you get it. That seems logical, but you would have been failing to fulfill that the player's most fervent desire. There's one thing that happens here. Whoa, what's that? Yeah, sure. Um, let's talk about the enemies first. What were the enemies we just saw? Can you list them? One Goomba, another Goomba, sure. Yeah. And what does he do? And when he shows up on screen, which is when he spawns, that's when his behavior starts. So it's a lot like a Souls game, right? They know how long after he shows up on screen he's going to start his behavior. He's going to jump very close to when you're jumping. It's very likely to screw you. Uh, which again, it's that message of like there are things in this that you haven't seen that are interesting and different. And now you're doing this is weird. So you guys know how the P meter works? It's the explicit gauge for how fast you're running, and when it fills up, you can fly. This is a straightaway that's long enough to do that, but at the same time, just like all their other stuff that is becoming more complex, there's a bunch of enemies in your way you have to do before you get that. So this is not strictly a we're going to show the player that they can run. This is still that in order to get to the point where you have the Tanuki suit, you have to have shown some mastery in the game already to get it. And then you have another challenge before you get it. So they're being a little bit more complicated than this is stuff that the player has to earn. This is not just being fed to them. Oh, that's crazy. That is super likely to happen in this game. And that can't happen in the first game because I think they only have the edge detection in this one, right? The side where if you hit it on this side, it goes that way, and if you hit on this side, it goes the other way. Um, does it go here? It goes here, doesn't it? I think if you get it there, it'll land on the clouds and then keep moving. But if you do it the other way, sorry. That's pretty weird. Why do you think they put that there, and why did they make it so high? Yeah, that would be kind of boring. And if this is our first level, what would you learn, right? So, do you think there's something important down here that we need the player to learn? Could be. Could be. Oh, there's a pit. Oh, sorry. I don't believe. Is there? Okay, what do you think's going on here, and what are they showing you? Because this is weird. Yeah, it does look a lot like we're kind of out of the game world, right? And now we're into something else. How does it make you feel? Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you're still playing, right? But it's different. It's safe. Um, this is a very interesting ending point where you don't just touch it; you get to keep playing the game, which is actually pretty common for what they do, and I think it's a really smart thing they do. In Super Mario Brothers, you don't just finish the level; you get to play the flagpole game, and so it's like a little thing of how well did you do at the very end. In Mario World, there's the raising and lowering like ribbon that you have to clear, and in this you get the backstage area, which does that transition, and then there's also a mini game at the end of it. Oh, yeah. As you see, yeah, you saw how it was flashing there. They're doing everything. They didn't do the specific like moving it down, but they sat on that screen for like 3 seconds showing it flashing. Cool. That's like a fifth of what we could talk about with this game, but we should probably call it. Yeah, I don't think you can play it either. Yeah, you're stuck. So if you're two player, they'll switch players. They don't want. They could have done it as play until you die, but usually, say it's an older sibling and a younger sibling. If you do it that way, the younger sibling will get to play even less. Like the younger sibling's already not going to get to play very much because they're going to die right away. But if the other one can keep going until they die, no good, no good. I don't think you can do that in this. You can do it in World. I may be wrong though. Yeah, and yeah, probably. Wait, Yoshi's Island? You can't play two player on Yoshi's Island. No. Yeah, but anyway, you guys are free to go. We're of course always free to go. I will stay here and hang out if you guys want to talk. And I think tomorrow I'll be here at 12 or so.
Yeah. Are you really on these right here?
You got all your food.
Yeah. Big one.
Yo, cool. Thank you very much.
It's very impressive.
Oh, awesome. Thanks. No, this is a lot of fun. Like, I mean, I think I was saying this last time, but like when James was like my professor and we were running a game design club, and that's how he came in. He was like doing this with us, and so we were doing that thing. So, you got to pass it down. hmm
And every awesome things. Yeah. People follow.